What is going on, everyone? Welcome. We got Jordan Elliott from Niner Nation in the building. The return, Jordan, of Brad Kuiper and Jordan McShay. How are we doing today, my guy?
I'm fantastic. Nobody wants to hear this because the 49ers were just playing in the playoffs, and I love January and February football, but draft season is the best season, and it is officially here. The possibilities are endless, and I could not be more excited about the coming months.
Absolutely. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to get into a ton of draft prospects. We're going to get into a ton of free agency. What we're going to do today is we're going to kind of look at some of the moves that the 49ers can make internally, externally, and through the draft. But first of all, Jordan, I know you were around these Twitter streets yesterday. It wasn't even a rumor. It was literally a speculation, throwing spaghetti against the wall, seeing if it stick, about the Tom Brady potential trade for Jimmy Garoppolo and all that kind of stuff. What is your just take on that? And then we'll get into the real business.
So first of all, if Tom Brady wants to play for your football team, you let Tom Brady play for your football team. It's unfortunate that it needs to be said because the 49ers had that opportunity 2 years ago and for whatever reason decided to go in a different direction. I don't care how old he is. The guy just threw for 43 touchdowns. If Tom Brady wants to come play for a season in San Francisco, you let it happen. I don't think it's going to happen, though, and I think there's two reasons why. Number one, I think Tom Brady is serious about his retirement. I think that he is somebody who has made it very clear that the amount of time he puts into his craft has cut into his personal life, and he wants to have, all the accomplishment he has on the field are great, but you can't replace the time you spend with your family. And I think he's made it very clear that's where his priorities are at. I also would point out that the scenario being floated, and it's so funny because it comes from these guys in like Boston, from like NBC Sports Boston or something. I saw at the start of this. Like, are the Celtics that bad? Or the Bruins that bad? Do you guys have nothing else going on that you think like, this is what you're talking about?
Brady and Garoppolo still live rent free in their heads, apparently.
It's ridiculous, man. So this is my whole thing, and I understand not everybody has time to watch film, or not everybody has like a great grasp of what teams are trying to do and run on offense. But I feel like even the most casual football fan can watch Tampa Bay's offense and watch the 49ers and see that there's a clear lack of a connection in terms of what Bruce Arians clearly looks for from his quarterbacks and what Jimmy Garoppolo does well. Tom Brady led the league in pass attempts over 20 yards this year. He had 88 pass attempts over 20 yards. Jimmy Garoppolo had 39. The year before, Tom Brady had 119. And this isn't just here. This is when Arians was calling plays in Pittsburgh, when he was working with Andrew Luck in Indianapolis, having Carson Palmer in Arizona, Jameis Winston before Tom Brady. The guy wants to push the ball downfield. His offense is predicated on being aggressive and taking shots downfield. I'm not sitting here and saying Jimmy Garoppolo has a weak arm, but if we're going to sit here and be honest with ourselves, pushing the ball downfield has never really been an area of Jimmy Garoppolo's game where we're like, wow, this is something that he looks super comfortable doing and wants to do all the time. I've watched way too many instances of him passing up wide open looks on deep shots and play action shot plays and stuff like that. He's much more comfortable in the short to intermediate. So I don't think it's a possibility based simply on the fact that why would Tampa Bay want him? It's literally like, of all the available quarterbacks, if you could pick the guy that probably least fits what Bruce Arians wants to do, it's probably Jimmy Garoppolo. And that's not a slight on him. It's just a schematic thing. Like, at the end of the day, the NFL is so reliant on finding people that fit your scheme and finding players. Like, it's not like, I like the NBA. The NBA is pretty much like the best players win. Like, that's usually what happens. The team with the most players, like, there's exceptions, obviously. Football is so different. You can get by with lesser talent if there's a schematic fit and you get 11, 12, whatever pieces together that fit and mesh well together. Jimmy Garoppolo and Bruce Arians is literally like oil and water to me. I don't understand the speculation. And I hate to put it this way. It just felt like this all stemmed from like lazy, like clickbaity, like, hey, we could say, how funny would it be to say that Jimmy Garoppolo is now replacing Tom Brady finally, the heir apparent.
That's literally what it was. There's a bunch of guys sitting around a table just like, hey, this would be a fun idea. And then Twitter went, just lit up and fired.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie, dude. It's a little insulting to those of us who actually spend time like studying this sport and paying attention to what's actually happening, because it's like, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, dude. Like, it doesn't add up. Like, it'd be like Like, it'd be a perfect example. It'd be like if you were a team where your entire offense in basketball was predicated on shooting the three ball, and you're like, hey, let's go out and let's have Ben Simmons come to our team. Like, it's not what he does. It's not what he does well. I know he got traded today, and I know he's going to the Nets. Maybe that's not the best reference, but it makes no sense, man. And like I said, it's insulting that got the amount of traction that it did, because it just doesn't add up. Like, so it doesn't even matter like what the 49ers want, like, because that's a whole other discussion. And I'm kind of with you. Like, I think it's time to just let Trey Lance play. Like, I think he's more than capable of doing what they need him to do. But it would never come to that, and it's insulting. Like, Tampa Bay just won a Super Bowl a year ago. Like, I feel like they deserve a little bit of respect, where people aren't just throwing out these scenarios where it's like, hey, you take Jimmy Garoppolo, he won a bunch of like, dude, they just won a Super Bowl a year ago. Like, they know what they need to do, and so it just makes no sense. I'm sorry. It's frustrated me, because it feels like it's just like one of those things where it's like it starts out as like this little spark, and next thing you know, 5 hours go by on Twitter and there's a full-on wildfire going on outside, and it's like wild that it ever gets to this.
It's hilarious, because I didn't even see the original report. I just saw everyone talking about it. So it felt like there's some actual speculation that might be actually linked to something. And then I had to ask Jason Aponte, who's chilling in the chat right now, Sideline Aponte. I was like, bro, where'd this even come from? He sent me the link. I watched. I was like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. This is what we're talking about. Like, it's peak offseason. As Jason was saying yesterday, day 10, it's now day 11. It's going to be a wild ride, Jordan. There's going to be a lot of twists and turns in this offseason. And again, one of the biggest storylines for the 49ers is, where's Jimmy Garoppolo going to land? So that's going to be something that we talk about a lot. And it's going to be something that we continue to kind of poke holes in. Does he fit here? Does he fit there? And I think you did a really good job of kind of talking about just from a schematic standpoint, right? Does Jimmy Garoppolo even fit with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Bruce Arians, and this type of scheme that he runs? Because push the Tom Brady stuff aside, that's the other part of the equation that has to be processed. Wasn't even taken into account. Something to think about. But since that is going to be a big point of emphasis this offseason, and, title of our show is Offseason Moves, let's transition right into Jimmy Garoppolo. Let's talk about, it's crystal clear, Jimmy Garoppolo is likely going to get traded. Players are talking about it across Super Bowl row, with all the media, everything. It's a foregone conclusion at this point. So we now take the next step of finding landing spots. What landing spots would you actually see making sense from draft compensation, fit, schematic fit, all that type of stuff? Where do you see a landing spot for potentially Jimmy Garoppolo in a trade?
I think there's a few places that make sense. Again, I've always been pretty open. I'm not like a huge fan of Jimmy Garoppolo's, but I also think that you could do worse, and there's plenty of teams that are arguably much worse off with what they have now, rather than if they potentially did bring in a player like Jimmy Garoppolo. I think it's a situation where you're not going to get him in a more I feel like ideal spot than where he was with Kyle, based on just the personnel they had, the ability to scheme up yards after the catch. It's going to be really hard to put him, because most of the other offensive minds who I feel are on that same level as Kyle Shanahan already have their Matthew Staffords and Patrick Mahomes. And, it just feels like those guys that are in that upper tier of play designing and calling are already set. They don't need, a replacement. So it's not going to be the same, but if you put him in a situation where he can have good playmakers around him, you can scheme up some looks off play action, you can allow him to attack the middle of the field. I think Washington is a decent spot. I think that he would be an upgrade over Heineke. Personally, I think Jimmy would be better. Is it going to be a huge, massive upgrade? Like, maybe not, but I do think that he's better, and I think that they have a pretty solid roster, and he would at least put them in the conversation for playoff contention.
And Jimmy brings leadership. There's other intangibles.
Yeah, there's intangibles. Yeah, absolutely. Like I know people hate having this discussion about like, oh, he's a winner, but he's been around winning culture, and I think that like, I'm not labeling him as like, because I hate that whole argument. I think it's just not. It distracts from what he actually does well, and it lacks nuance. But I think he could be somebody like him coming in could kind of, galvanize a locker room. And again, it's not maybe the skill set that drives them, but it's just more so him being able to consistently get the ball in space to guys like Terry McLaurin, De'Ami Brown, Logan Thomas, these guys, Gibson, the running back, Antonio Gibson. So I think that could work. I think even, Carolina, they're kind of stuck with Darnold because Carolina is one I've seen floated, but like they picked up that option on Darnold. I don't see how they can.
And they traded the draft capital to get him too.
I don't think they could do that. Pittsburgh's the other one that gets floated around a bunch. The interesting thing though with Pittsburgh is this is my whole thing is that if you look at what they've done the last couple of years, first of all, I have empathy for any Steelers fan out there because that offense was just abysmal to watch the last couple of years, and especially this year. So I don't know if that's like what Matt Canada is really striving to do, or if it's just like, hey, we're playing with like Ben Roethlisberger on his like last, twilight of his career, his arm's shot, he can't push the ball downfield. So we're just pretty much doing what we can with the quarterback we have. So that's where it gets interesting because if it's what Matt Canada wants to run, absolutely. Like Jimmy would be an upgrade over what we've seen from Ben this past year and a half or so. I think he would fit the scheme well. He would do well in that quick passing game. You also have to remember, like, they have guys like Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool, guys that you would argue are better utilized as downfield threats, guys you can throw contested balls to, guys who do things that, again, doesn't really align with what we've seen Jimmy do very well. And if you're going to make the move to bring in a quarterback and give up, a second or third round pick, whatever the compensation may be, you're going to want there to be a tangible upgrade there. So that one's really hard because I wish I could say I have no idea if that's really what Matt Canada wants to do or if he was just scheming around, a franchise icon who they were kind of just like, hey, we can't shove this guy out the door. We don't have any better options. We're pretty much just rolling with Ben Roethlisberger, and this is what he gives us. So it kind of does come down to that. Houston gets floated around a bunch, but they're not really in a position to be winning anything unless they have this massive turnaround this year. I don't see why they would move off Davis Mills. Denver makes sense to an extent because I do think that at times Jimmy is more willing to take chances that Teddy Bridgewater isn't. And I just don't think that Drew Lock is very good. I think Drew Lock has a lot of physical gifts, but he's not really, there's a lot of people who I respect who cover the Broncos and follow them closely, and they are very fed up with Drew Lock. And I think that even they might welcome Jimmy.
So no comeback season for Drew Lock. He's out the door at this point.
I just don't see it, man. I mean, the highlight of his career was when he was like gigging to Yeezy on the sideline, or on the sideline.
Yeah,
that was like
that was a highlight.
I mean, that was when I was like, hey, like maybe this guy's got it. No, that was literally it. Like that was the most juice he ever brought in his career. But I digress, man. I mean, New Orleans is interesting too. I thought it was really funny. Dennis Allen said, "I want a winner at quarterback," and I thought that was so funny because immediately I'm like, "Oh man, like everybody's gonna run with this." It'd be like, "Well, don't guess who we have?" They're gonna start seeing the graphics of Jimmy with his win-loss record and all this stuff, or the pictures of him with his Patriots rings and stuff. But like, it depends what they get because I don't think Jameis was bad last year. I thought Jameis was actually like having a pretty solid season before he got hurt. But if there's some questions around that or they don't bring him back, Jimmy is 1,000% an upgrade over Ian Book or Trevor Siemian or Taysom Hill or any of these other guys. Yes. And it depends what they kind of want to do. I thought it made more sense with Sean Payton because I thought Sean Payton actually did a really good job scheming up a short game for Drew Brees. Obviously, Drew Brees is a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I don't think it's fair to say that, oh, Jimmy could just go in and do what Drew Brees did. But I do think that there was a willingness to cater to Drew Brees' decline in arm strength towards the end of his career there and change things up. And I think that's kind of like, that's going to be the ideal thing for Jimmy Garoppolo wherever he goes. A team's going to need to not be stubborn and say, you need to come here and run what we want to do. If a team's really going to invest and get the most out of him, they're going to have to do kind of what we saw Kyle do this past season. Like, I don't know if anybody was noticing this year, but the 49ers ran the majority of their play action shot plays out of the shotgun. They ran a lot of their offensive snaps out of the shotgun, which they've been under center for the majority of the last couple seasons. And I think it's because of so much of what Jimmy does well is getting that quick passing game, those quick, fast reads out of a look where he has a little bit more of a chance to kind of survey the pre-snap look from a defense. So if a team's willing to kind of cater to his needs rather than just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, then I think, yeah, he absolutely could find some success somewhere. I just don't think that there's any one place where it's like, this is like a match made in heaven for Jimmy Garoppolo and this team's going to be jumping at the bits to give him, give up a second or third round pick for him. I just don't really see that happening. I just think what's going to happen though is that this rookie class isn't great. and the other options aren't great, and there's enough vacancies that would look at Jimmy as a partial upgrade, that the market will create itself. I just don't think that any one team stands out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. A lot of the people in the chat are saying Pittsburgh. I agree. I think, that might be a situation where it fits. Najee Harris even wouldn't mind bringing Jimbo on over. He even referenced QB wins as well. So we understand that at the end of the day, NFL players, they want to win. They care about stats, they care about their performance, but at the end of the day, they want to win. They've seen Jimmy Garoppolo win. They see how the teammates talk about Jimmy Garoppolo. So it does feel like, though, during this offseason period, even when the season ends, it still feels like his stock is kind of growing, almost. Like, it's just a feel that I have. But when we got through the Senior Bowl, we're understanding that, okay, maybe there aren't quarterback first round plug and play starters. Malik Willis, really nice, right? But guys like Kenny Pickett out of Pitt, is he going to be one of those guys? Carson Strong, maybe not. Maybe they're more developmental. Desmond Ridder. So do you actually see a scenario where the value of Jimmy Garoppolo is actually going up based on the simple supply and demand model that exists? And we understand that winning is important in the NFL and people will pay to win, even if it's not the prettiest way. Do you think there is a world that exists right now where maybe you look around the league and Jimmy's stock is actually rising a little bit just based on the supply and demand model alone?
Yeah, it's funny. I was listening to an old episode of the Pat McAfee show the other day about, I was going back and I wanted to hear like what some of these national media, bigger outlets, non-local 49ers coverage was saying about Trey Lance after he was drafted. So I was listening to this podcast about the draft the day after, and they had Mark Schlereth, people remember from ESPN. He was a Broncos offensive lineman. He covers them to an extent now. He had a really interesting point that I thought, it like seems kind of obvious, but it's something I think we kind of overlook. And he was talking about how the NFL has like a 30% roster turnover every year. And he said that I think the reason that a lot of people overlook that, or a reason they aren't cognizant of why it happens, there's a lot of players who end up on NFL teams who really have no business playing at that level. And I say that with all due respect. I obviously am, nowhere close to an NFL player and will never pretend that I am. But if we're speaking objectively here, like there are a lot of guys who end up on NFL rosters and end up in starting spots who shouldn't be. I think there's this misconception where it's like I see arguments all the time where somebody's like, oh, this is a backup level player. And somebody's like, well, name 32 players better than them. Just because a team is starting a player doesn't mean they're a starting caliber player. It could just mean that they don't have options. And it could just mean for that season, they're sitting there and they're starting players who really don't belong in starting roles, or have players on the roster who frankly don't belong on NFL rosters. So I think in the case of the quarterbacks, like you would have a hard time arguing that there are 32 players right now in the NFL who are 100% deserving of or I don't say deserving because they work very hard. I would say that you'd have a hard time objectively stating that there are 32 players that are objective starting level NFL quarterbacks that are going to give you baseline competence that comes from an NFL starter. And I think because of that, you're going to get a bigger return from Jimmy Garoppolo, because as much as he can be inconsistent, he has shown a baseline level of competence that when he has a good situation around him and he can stay on the field, he generally does pretty well. The team around him does pretty well. People say it's the defense, it's the run game. Those are valid points. He didn't do it by himself, and anybody arguing otherwise would be completely wrong. But at the end of the day, we have to look at the fact that in his time in San Francisco, the 2 seasons that he basically was healthy for the majority, if not a full season, the 49ers' floor was reaching the NFC Championship game. Again, Not all of that is because of him, but if you can put a good situation around him, he's objectively going to do enough to contribute to you having a chance at getting there. Because that's the only argument that I've made, and that's kind of where I've changed my stance. Before, I was one of those people where I'm like, man, he's just, great run game, great play caller. The defense is elite. Like, it's, he's set up for success. But objectively speaking, the quarterback position is so important. And after having 2 seasons to go off of, it's not just one anomaly from 2019. Objectively speaking, the 49ers wouldn't have gotten there if not for some contribution for him. Like, the position is too important to just write it off entirely, like he was completely carried. So I think, again, it's going to be hard to find like that ideal situation for him. But I think there's plenty of teams that can convince themselves like, hey, like Denver has a good roster. They have a good defense. They have playmakers. Like I could see a situation where they could convince themselves like, hey, if we get the right system in for this guy, like why can't we make a run like the 49ers made? Why can't we do this? New Orleans still has a good defense for the most part. They have a weird cap situation, so it's a little bit tougher. Pittsburgh
They're
was in
really
the playoffs.
far behind the cap.
Yeah, dude, that's a mess. But
like
you know what I'm
76
saying?
million under the cap, like crazy. I've never seen anything like that before under the cap, like crazy.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying, though, right? Like you can talk yourself into a situation where you're like, hey, like I don't expect this guy to, like it's like that saying, like the tractor or trailer conversation. Like people say some players are trailers along for the ride, and some people are tractors pulling the rest of the team with them. I don't think anybody's going to argue that Jimmy Garoppolo is a tractor, but he's done a serviceable job just providing enough baseline competence that he's not going to single-handedly sink the season. And yes, I've seen plenty of games where his play was the difference in them winning or losing. But at the end of the day, they also got results with him as the starting quarterback that they objectively wouldn't be able to attain if he didn't have some part in helping them get there. So yeah, I think that you can convince yourself if you're another team, like, hey, it can't get much worse. Like, perfect example. I don't know if they're going to be in the market for it, and it's a weird situation they have. The Cleveland Browns had a really good team. They had a top 5 defense. They have, in my opinion, the best running back in football, and Nick Chubb. They had good playmakers on offense. Their offensive line was good. Baker Mayfield absolutely was. Baker Mayfield was awful. If Jimmy Garoppolo's on the Cleveland Browns last year, I think they make the playoffs. I'm not saying they're going to win the Super Bowl, but I definitely think they make the playoffs. So I think there's enough teams like that where they can kind of say, hey, we've built out a good, foundation. We just need a guy that might help us get over the top. It's not, that's a great analogy. Ellis just
it really is good. I like
Nobody ever gives credit to the trailer hitch ever, but
no one ever.
It's a vital piece.
I think Ellis just did something. I'm not gonna lie. I think he just did something right there. Like
Ellis just blew my mind.
Right? Like, okay, there is that conversation that is had all the time across the league. You hear evaluators use that reference all the time. But there is a place for the hitch. The hitch is a key component in pulling the trailer and getting the, all of it. Connect, like, Ellis, you dog. I think you did something there.
That's a fantastic analogy. I was going to say, no, Ellis nailed it, because it's really, like, at the end of the day, like, it's so hard to quantify. Like, Jimmy Garoppolo, like, I love sports, man. I love football. I love basketball, baseball, hockey, all that stuff. Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the most polarizing and difficult sports topics that I've ever discussed in my entire life, because it's so hard to find a quantifiable way to, like, as 49ers fans, we can just be kind of
because it's intangible, we scout and I scout through intangible. I'm looking for the person. I'm looking for those types of traits because I've been in locker rooms. I've not been in NFL locker rooms, but I understand what it's like when you have a talented player who doesn't work hard, doesn't have those intangible traits that you want. They don't love football, but I've also been on the other side of it where you have those intangible traits with a mediocre player and they can somehow rise the ability of everyone around them, right? Like, so there's plenty of different ways to go about it, but the intangible is something that is just not talked about amongst, I think, normal NFL fans, I guess is a way to put it.
Yeah, and it's something that it's so hard to see too, because if like I thought for a while too, I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of like, hey, like, what are they gonna say, that they can't stand the guy or they don't like him? Like, usually you don't hear stuff like that. There's exceptions. But this past year really showed me, like, no, like, this love and admiration that these guys have, the respect they have, like, it's very real. They're offering it up. It's not like they're being pressed to, hey, say a bunch of good things about Jimmy. Like, no, these guys genuinely feel that way. And that's earned. That's not given. That's something that you do earn. And I think at the end of the day, it's so easy to get caught up in watching film and just watching, like, the product on the field that we forget that there are human beings playing this game. I say that all the time, but it's so important because it's so easy to overlook. That those interactions matter. That chemistry you build matters. Like, that stuff's important. So I do think, I think, I don't want to compare it because it's not the same, but I think Jimmy has the potential to kind of take on a role that Alex Smith had later in his career, where he's not going to be, again, a guy that's going to carry your team and light up scoreboards and stat sheets. But I think he's a guy that can come in and be a consummate pro, have the respect of his teammates, and maybe, just maybe, he's the guy that can kind of pass the baton to the next generation of, quarterback, or the next up and coming star you have at that position, while offering those leadership intangibles. Because, there's plenty of time in the offseason for us to talk about whether or not the Niners could have had, developed Trey Lance or done this or that. But I do think that there is something to be said for having a quarterback that young, getting to see firsthand how a guy and I say this with all due respect, getting to see hey, this quarterback isn't, it's not like this guy's out here, as the top 3, top 5 quarterback in the league, but these guys all love him. They all go to bat for him. These guys show up every day and support him. So I think there's something valuable to be seen from Trey Lance going wow, if this guy who's kind of, just kind of an average, run-of-the-mill quarterback can get this kind of respect, imagine what I can do if I come in and I work hard with all of my, which he does on his own. I'm not going to sit here and act like, oh, all of a sudden Trey Lance is going to work hard because he saw Jimmy Garoppolo doing it. But I do think that there aren't many quarterbacks who come in that get drafted high with that kind of skill set that Trey Lance has, where they get the opportunity to see a player like Jimmy Garoppolo earn that respect and see the little things day to day. It could be something small they do in the meeting room. It could be just the way he interacts with guys in the locker room. Just minor things like that, I think could go a long way for him. And I just think that it's a luxury that very few players are afforded. And I don't think that it needs to continue, obviously. I think Trey Lance is more than ready to go now. But in hindsight, there could be some value from him seeing firsthand, hey, this guy's an average quarterback and everybody loves him. If I'm out here and I'm playing like a superstar, imagine what they're going to do for me and imagine how much they'll support me. So I think that's, that kind of has some value. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think there's a lot of opportunity for Trey Lance to sit back, watch how Jimmy Garoppolo went through the media storm, how he handled it internally, because when we hear like George Kittles and we hear the Kyle Juszczyks talking about Jimmy Garoppolo, they talked about a guy who came into the building every single day, had the same mindset, same mentality, and just attacked his work, and people respect that, right? Especially when everyone's trying to rip you apart. They're trying to rip you apart through your teammates. You can get distracted, right? It's just like if any of us were going through, let's say, a Twitter firestorm, it gets really easy to kind of compartmentalize it and just compound the situation and start getting out of control with your thoughts and feelings. But what they keep talking about Jimmy Garoppolo is just his unrelenting ability to just keep moving forward. And I think that is kind of what you're talking about, but that could absolutely be extremely valuable to Trey Lance.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, my whole point is that it's just there are certain things that we really don't know, and really the people in the building are the only ones who will know. But at the end of the day, there's enough quarterbacks out there that are, I would say, objectively better than Jimmy Garoppolo, who I don't see their teammates coming to bat for them like this and coming to, unprompted to give the level of support that they give. And I think that does speak volumes about who he is as a person. But at the end of the day,
what's going on? You mentioned Baker earlier. Look at the way his teammates talk about him, and you got players' parents openly. That's when things aren't connecting well.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, too, as much as I respect that and I respect how good of a person he is, ultimately being a good person doesn't win football games. And I also think that at the end of the day, the play on the field does matter. So it's hard because everybody's kind of having this. I'm seeing a lot of oh no, Jimmy's such a good guy, and it's people are kind of rationalizing it into finding a reason why, it was a mistake for them to move on, or why did it have to go this way? Ultimately it went that way because the play on the field is more important than if you're a good person. There's plenty of people who are great people who aren't great football players. And
both things can be true at once. Jimmy Garoppolo absolutely kept the job and was allowed to start this entire year. And there might be some contractual things behind the scenes that also played into that, but he earned that from his teammates. He earned that from his coaches. He earned that. And so there's something to be said about that as well, right? That's kind of what the point I think you're trying to get to. It's he can still be a good leader. He can still be all those things, and he could still have deficiencies as a player. Both things can be true at the same time.
Hey, man, I'll put it to you like this. At the end of the day, if I'm building a team, I would rather take the guy who's a complete jerk who's way better at what they do than the guy who's a nice guy who's not as good. And that's just as much as simple as I can put it. At the end of the day, what happens on the football field is more important, but you ideally get both. And that's what I think the 49ers have a chance with Trey Lance, because I think Trey Lance has all of those leadership intangibles. I think he has the work ethic, and I think he's very skilled. Ideally, you get that kind of return. But if I had to pick and choose between a guy who's a great guy, an average quarterback, and a guy who's a complete jerk and is great at what he does, I'm taking the jerk every single time and not thinking twice. Like what happens on the field ultimately is going to matter way more all the time. Like
GM Jordan's football team is going to be comprised of players that all have the personality of Richie Incognito, and it's going to be when you talk about bully ball, that's where Jordan's going with the.
My team's going to be like Mean Machine from the longest yard, dude.
Alvin Kamara is going to be your starting running back. You're going to have all the dogs on your team, man. It's going to be legit. But Ellis said a while back, he was asking about some of the actual compensation for Jimmy Garoppolo. Again, kind of what we were talking about with his value. He says, could Jimmy Garoppolo get a landing spot for a second with a conditional first tied on based on how much he plays? We saw something similar with the Carson Wentz deal when the Colts traded him from Philly based on how many games he played, determined essentially if it was going to be a second or a first. There's incentivizers built in. What do you think it's going like to take just from a straight pick compensation standpoint? I don't think that's too far off. Again, we came into that last segment kind of talking about where do we think his value's at. It does feel like it could be the second in a player, second in additional, second with a conditional round pick or stipulation built in. What would you say it would take to actually give to get Jimmy Garoppolo in return based on the kind of supply and demand that exists right now?
I think it would be closer to probably like a conditional second, maybe a third that can turn into a second with playing time incentives. Like the player you're getting back, I don't think you're going to get back, an impact player per se. I do think a lot of it does have to do with the fact that the next team taking on Jimmy Garoppolo would have to make a pretty sizable commitment because the odds of them just bringing him in on the 1 year he has left on his deal at around $25 million seems kind of slim to me. So I think they would have to sign him to an extension pretty much upon agreeing to the trade. So yeah. I think like a conditional second would be a great return if they could get that. If they get a third round pick, that's, like if they come out of this with a top 85 pick in this coming draft, I think that's a net win for them because I think ultimately they would be fine, kind of cutting him and letting him choose his own place if it came down to it. I don't think they'll have to because I think that, there is a demand for him. I just don't see it being, super significant based on, the fact that they will have to make that contract extension happen most likely. And again, like he's not bad, but he's also not like, I think with Carson Wentz, it's interesting because Carson Wentz has days where he looks really, really bad, but he has days where he looks really, really good too. And I just think as much as Jimmy Garoppolo's kind of on that same inconsistent level of play, the highs and lows aren't as extreme. And he doesn't have the physical gifts that Wentz has. Wentz did have that big contract, but I think ultimately like the Colts were kind of banking on maximizing. Like, he was an MVP candidate a few years ago. There was hope that maybe they could find that again. So I don't think it'll be quite the same. So I think, like a top 85 pick would be where I would probably land.
Yeah, I think he'd probably be a little higher in my book. I think the supply and demand model is going to play more of a aspect than actual like trying to like look at who he is and then assign a value based on that. I think you look at who he is and then the desperation across the league because we talked about it. There might be 32 teams and 32 starting quarterbacks, but maybe not all 32 of those guys are supposed to be starting or should be starting. And I think at the least baseline, Jimmy has proven he is a baseline competent starting quarterback. Now he's going to be that guy, the Patrick Mahomes, the Josh Allen that can go crazy for you every single week. Probably not, but he can manage, he can communicate, he can lead. That's a big part of the job description. So I have him a little bit more higher in value. I think he could be a second with a conditional. The first is a pipe dream for me, but I'm not putting it out of a range of, possible outcomes. I think it could happen, especially if the 49ers add something on top of it. Jimmy, maybe a fourth, fifth, maybe a third, whatever. There's some ranges of outcome for getting that draft stock up. We'll see. But there is going to be an opening, Jordan. We know Sudfeld might be sticking around again. Who's going to be QB2 behind Trey? I imagine there's going to be 3 quarterbacks on the roster. Kyle Shanahan has not always, but historically gone into his seasons with three quarterbacks on the roster, whether it's 2 active, 1 practice squad. Historically, 3 quarterbacks. So who's going to be the backup behind Trey if we are assuming Trey is going to be the starter? Is it going to be Sudfeld and or Do they bring in maybe another veteran, draft a young kid just to sit behind? What do you think about that?
Real quick, if you don't mind, I saw a few people ask in the chat about the wall behind me.
Mm-hmm.
So to just quell the curiosity, it's Ricky Williams right behind me, Patrick Willis. There's one of Joe and Jerry, Dante Hall, who's one of my favorite NFL players of all time, and then the bottom one is Michael Vick at Lambeau in that playoff game they won. So yeah, that's I'm
The
you know
wall's
I grew
coming
up loving the
together.
49ers.
It's looking real nice.
It's coming. I got some more in the works. I'm moving in the next week, but you guys will see when I get everything together. There's some stuff there you guys will like probably. But
The
yeah, that Ricky Williams
maturation process of
dude, that Ricky
Jordan's,
Williams one is my favorite one. There's a little message on. I don't know if I can zoom in on it, but there's a little message on it from him. That's pretty cool. So
it's iconic.
To answer your question, I think so. It's really interesting because I think actually, like, you were there for it at training camp. Like people think we're just joking. Like, Nate Sudfeld can sling the rock, dude. Like, Nate Sudfeld is a decent.
We were
NFL,
like, oh,
backup.
he's absolutely better than Josh Rosen. Like, there's no, like, not even a comparison. Like, Sudfeld is far and away more competent than Josh Rosen was at training camp.
100%. And I think that you're in a spot where I think for like 49ers fans are so scarred from the amount of QB turnover and injuries they've had, where they're like, we have to get a guy like, Mariota or Mitch Trubisky or Tyrod Taylor or one of these guys. I think the problem with that is that just like we're talking about, there's going to be so many openings and there's so many spots where there aren't really quarterbacks that are solidified or they're going to be, a home run for the starting job. That players like Tyrod Taylor and Mariota, like if I'm them, I would much like Mariota just spent 2 years backing up Derek Carr. I don't think he's quite ready to just ride off into the sunset as a career backup. And I think that there will be opportunities for somebody like Mariota to at least push for a starting job somewhere. I think it's pretty evident if you were to come to San Francisco, hey man, this is Trey Lance's show. And the odds of him beating out Trey Lance for that starting job are extremely slim.
Oh, could you imagine?
Yeah, it would be a mess. And I think that everybody, like, there's nothing wrong with wanting those players. I totally understand the logic behind it. It's just, I think those players would much rather be in a situation where they have a chance to start, especially those guys who have experienced what it's like to be an NFL starter. They don't want to sit there on the sideline, man. They want to be on the field playing. They want the payday that comes with being a starter or possibly getting to start games. So it's tough. I think that the Tyrod Taylor thing is interesting because he does have a connection with Anthony Lynn, who, by the way, was just an absolute home run hire. I wrote something about it on Niners Nation about his background and stuff. It might still be there. It was on like Monday, I think. But if anybody wants to check that out, I went back the last 20 years of where he's coached and the success he's had. And it's a lot to be excited about, the pairing of him and Kyle Shanahan. But he obviously does have a history with Tyrod Taylor. The only other thing I would point out is that this draft class at quarterback is kind of odd. But one example I wanted to throw out there was the Ravens got Tyler Huntley, from Utah. I'm a Pac-12 guy. So I never really thought that he would be, a transcendent talent or somebody that would be out there in the NFL dicing up defenses. But when Lamar Jackson went out this year, like, he stepped in pretty admirably and he kept them in football games. Like, they were losing games on like 2-point conversions.
Won the dynasty playoff games there at the end.
So, like, I think there's something to be said about maybe there being a guy that you can find that can be kind of that, like, rookie that you bring in that you can get by on athleticism alone, even if there's a learning curve. Like, if Trey Lance had to miss a week or two, you might be able to get by on a week or two of having a player with a high rushing floor who's able to be mobile, who can get outside the pocket, scheme up looks for. So that, to me, like that, or like keeping Nate Sudfeld, I think they could keep Nate Sudfeld, and I don't think he's all that bad because realistically, like, I don't know if you remember the quote from Tom Moore. He was the offensive coordinator in Indianapolis when Peyton Manning was there. And someone asked him why they didn't spend practice reps running with the second team. So basically why they weren't running reps during practice with quarterbacks not named Peyton Manning. And his response was basically, we're effed if Peyton Manning can't play. If 18 goes down, we're effed. We don't practice effed is basically what he said. And I think that while that's not the complete mindset I would take, like, I think you should still have you don't want to tank your season just because the quarterback went down.
We saw a situation where Trey Lance comes in, starts week 5 against Arizona and gets hurt after his first NFL start. There's a world that exists where Trey Lance starts against the Colts if he doesn't get hurt. Kyle Shanahan even spoke to that it was getting down to the wire there. And I think he could have if he didn't get hurt. So to your point, backup might might be needed, right?
Yeah, and I think it's just like it's so hard. So like Nick Foles won a Super Bowl starting the last few games as a backup quarterback, but like that's like such a one-off thing that realistically, if your number one quarterback goes down, odds are your season's pretty much tanked. Like you might have a situation where like like a player, I think like Seattle did a really good job. Sorry, bringing in like Geno Smith. Like I don't think Geno Smith is the same caliber as Russell Wilson, but I also thought the offense didn't come to a grinding halt with him in there. Yeah. So as long as the 49ers just find somebody who can like execute the offense at like a baseline level, like they won games with Nick Mullins starting for them in spot starts. If you're going to make Nick Mullins play 16 games, like your record's probably not going to be good.
CJ Beathard almost took down Aaron Rodgers on Monday night in Lambeau. Anything can happen.
Yeah, I saw J-Tan said Andy Dalton. Like if Andy Dalton came and backed up Trey Lance, I think that would be fine because if Trey Lance missed a couple games, I think you could go in saying, hey, Andy Dalton isn't going to be – he may not be the reason we win this game, but he won't be the reason we lose this game.
He would be able to manage the offense, step in and not miss a beat, right?
Yeah, so that – I think J-Tan nailed it. Like that's the kind of like player that I would look for. Like somebody who's probably – like I think at this point Andy Dalton probably isn't going to be – like maybe somebody will do it. But after, in Dallas, Chicago the last couple of years, like it's probably like not happening for him anymore, right? So I think a player like that would be really good because you can still maintain hope. Like if Trey Lance had to miss a month of the season, like, hey, we could probably tread water. But I think what happens is people are like, well, we have to get a guy like Mariota who can come in and play the rest of the season and keep us in the Super Bowl. If Trey Lance gets hurt, like the season's not going to go the way you want it to go. And that's the way most teams are going to go if their number one quarterback gets hurt. The 49ers just need to find somebody that can allow them to tread water in the meantime if somebody gets hurt,
Absolutely. So we spent a lot of time talking about the quarterback position. Let's talk about a different position. Let's keep it in-house, though. Clearly, free agency is going to be coming up, the draft, plenty of moves. Who are some players internally and we understand Deebo Samuel is going to be up for a contract extension, or they're working on it at least. Potentially Nick Bosa. We've heard reports of him getting a deal on average of $30+ million a year. But those are going to be the top end moves that get all the hype. What are some other moves in regards to retaining free agents? Because there are, I believe, 28 total free agents on this roster. Who are some guys that the 49ers need to keep the core together and keep competing for playoffs and potentially championships?
If I'm Jed York and I'm John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, and the 49ers brain trust, I am calling every single Brinks truck in the greater Santa Clara County area, and I am having them go directly to DJ Jones' house, and I am paying that man whatever amount of money, in a reasonable sense, that he wants. Like I jokingly say blank check, but obviously I don't, that is by far, in my opinion, the one player they cannot let get away. They have a few players that are extremely important. DJ Jones' biggest problem was that he couldn't get through a full season being healthy, and that's why I think they were reluctant to give him a sizable payday and keep him. What DJ Jones does for that defense, for that run defense, the way his ability to rush the passer, create pressure from the interior, just the sheer athleticism of a guy that's built like that, I think is something the 49ers can't pass up. I'm trying to remember who said it, but somebody mentioned how the 49ers were kind of toying around with moving Armstead and Jones back and forth on the interior. And if you think about it, DJ Jones is kind of built like a boulder. The guy's like 6 foot, 300+ pounds, but he's kind of short and stout, low to the ground. And then you have Eric Armstead, who's 6'8", whatever he is, 290. So imagine you're an offensive lineman, and every other rep you're going from blocking a guy who's almost a foot shorter, but also wider and stouter, to a guy who's longer.
Really different skill sets.
It's like getting a curveball thrown at you all game. And I think we saw that manifest itself into an increase in production when they started kind of, moving them around a little bit. So DJ Jones for me would be the big one. The other guy would be, and it's tough because it's based on the number. I thought the 49ers hit a home run. They brought in Arden Key for 1 year at just a little over $1 million. It was $1,045,000. That to me was one of the best contracts in the entire NFL this past season. Arden Key moving to the interior completely unlocked that pass rush and allowed this defensive line to ascend to new heights that, in my opinion, was what ultimately propelled them on that deep playoff run. He might have priced himself out of the 49ers budget because he did play so well in this system. So for me, it would be those two guys. Jaquiski Tartt, I would love to have back. I think he ultimately signs somewhere else. And I understand 49ers fans have this thing where they're like trying to compare him to Kyle Williams because of that dropped interception. And I think it's just it's the way things go. I understand the reality of the situation, but one play shouldn't erase 7 years of production with a franchise, and he was extremely important to what they did.
And right on point, Gammon says re-sign Tart. Hufanga is nice to give starters a breather, but he doesn't possess catch-up speed in the same manner that Tart displayed, just like in the Green Bay game when he had that crazy play to make essentially what became a game-winning play. It's just what you're saying is a lot of people just focus on the very last thing they saw, right?
Yeah, and this is one thing real quick too. I don't want to talk forever about it. I appreciate anybody caring to listen to what I have to say. If that interception drop had happened with like a minute and a half left in the game and the 49ers take 3 knees and the game's over, I would understand it. Like, that would be really hard. There were 10 minutes left in that game and the 49ers didn't have a positive
they weren't
play
out
on
the
offense.
weeds. Yeah.
They didn't get a single yard of offense after that play happened. So it's unfortunate. Yes, he'd be the first person. Man. Yeah, he'd be the first person to tell you that he should have caught that ball. But I just think the time, it's just it's the reality of sports. So I get it. The other thing I would add real quick too is that I think Laken Tomlinson is a good player, but I just think that the 49ers would be better off, depending on the price, moving Aaron Banks to left guard back to his natural position, allow him to play where he was comfortable. And I think putting Banks next to the superstar that is Trent Williams will help him grow and help mask some of the growing pains and deficiencies he may have. And I just think ultimately, Laken Tomlinson's been really good. He's coming off a Pro Bowl season. He doesn't miss games. He's played in 83 straight games for the 49ers. That's just remarkable. And the only time he misses snaps was he missed 3 snaps when his shoe came off. And he had to literally run off the sideline because his shoe came off. So
that's right. I remember that last year.
He's been phenomenal. I just think that, with the capital you invested in Banks and from what I saw in Banks playing left guard and the fact you have a player like Trent Williams that can kind of mask again some of the issues you probably will have getting accustomed to the NFL game, it's going to come down to making some sacrifices. And I hope that Laken Tomlinson gets a big bag from somebody because he earns it. He's played his tail off the last few years. He's a great player.
Correct.
I just would be more inclined to pay DJ Jones first. I just think DJ Jones is a player that's really hard to replicate. And I don't think the 49ers have an immediate replacement for DJ Jones. I think you could argue that there's a path to Aaron Banks being an immediate replacement for Laken Tomlinson.
And I think that is a realm of possibility that I think 49er fans if you ask and you poll the fan base, I would say probably 95% want Laken Tomlinson to return to the team, get paid. Again, when you see Big Trent Williams come out in his exit interview and say the things that he said emphatically about Laken Tomlinson having to be a part of this team moving forward and those kinds of things. And then you see the kind of the dejection from Laken Tomlinson himself when he comes to speak, and you're just kind of you kind of see the writing on the wall. It does kind of feel like with Laken Tomlinson being the Iron Man that he is, being in the position that he's in, making the Pro Bowl, he has elevated his stock and perception across the league, which means value-wise, it's probably raising with it. So we understand, at least right now, and you might know better than I do, but the 49ers, I think, are sitting around $2 to $3 million in cap space as we sit right now. So we understand when Jimmy Garoppolo gets moved and some other moves happen, there will be some cap space that opens up, but it's also not like end of 2017 when they had however million and just available cap space that they didn't even know what to do with. It's a lot different, right? So there are going to be cap casualties. And with Laken Tomlinson, it feels like that's what the Aaron Banks move kind of was, in a sense. I know we kind of thought it could be a fit at right guard in his first year, but he wasn't really able to get up to speed quite yet. But it does kind of seem like the overall thought process was to replace Laken at left guard when he was due for a contract, just because I don't know if they can afford it, right, is essentially what it kind of feels like.
Yeah, and it's just, like I said, it's going to come down to them having to make some tough decisions. One other player I did want to mention is that I think they need to find a way to bring Raheem Mostert back. I do think that, it's hard because I actually said this on Twitter the other day, and I had a lot of people come at me sideways. I think that is misconception sometimes based on the production in this offense that, you can just put anybody in at running back and you're just going to have, an elite talent because Bobby Turner and Kyle Shanahan are really good at what they do.
Yeah.
I have not seen any running back since Kyle Shanahan has been in San Francisco that has played for the 49ers that has the combination of vision and just the feel for the zone blocking scheme that Raheem Mostert does. Everybody talks about his home run speed and how fast he is and all that. That's great. To me, that's just a bonus. If you added a few decimal points to Raheem Mostert, let's say you ran a 4.6 40, I would still think he's the best running back they've had based purely on his vision and based purely on his feel for the way those blocks develop upfield. And as Admiral, I think Elijah Mitchell being a 6th-round pick, the 49ers got tremendous value. If Elijah Mitchell never played another snap for the 49ers, if he just decided, hey, I'm done playing football, the 49ers still – yeah, they got great value for a 6th-round pick this season.
They did.
But I don't think that he is a true number one back. I thought that he left a lot of yards on the field. I thought that there was a lot of room to improve with vision. And people are like, oh, he's a rookie. He'll get better. A lot of positions, I think you can apply that to. Playing running back, there really isn't much you can do to improve vision, in my opinion. Like, that's something that you just kind of like have or don't. It's not impossible to do, but it's not like reading a defense. It's not like,
it's feel.
It's something that you either have or you don't.
You have it in you. I will say this though, just to come to Elijah's defense. I feel like that was evident. Something I talked about on my film breakdowns almost every week. We would see, Elijah not necessarily knowing how to set up the block and then cutting off of it, because that's what makes Mostert so good. He has this ability to throttle down a gear, set up a block as if he's running to the outside, get the lineman in correct leverage, and then cut back using said leverage and hit it with speed. And all of that makes Raheem Mostert amazing. And why you and I believe, talk about him in such high regard. Elijah had a hard time catching up to speed. He was getting hurt, catching up to speed. I will say those last couple games that he had, I felt like he took a huge step forward in the vision category. And so I'm actually still hoping that Elijah Mitchell continues to develop in that regard. And I'm not going to say he is what he is right now. I think there is still a potential of him getting a little bit better. But that's not Mostert level better. Like, it could. There's a world that exists that he does get there. But Mostert is just different in his running style and how he fits with the offensive line. And you could see the entire scheme change because they didn't have Raheem Mostert. Like, it was pretty impactful not to have Raheem Mostert around last year.
Yeah, and so this is my biggest thing. I'm not saying he's a bad player by any means. Right. I think for the value and the context of everything, like, it was an objectively successful season for him and the 49ers based on where he was taken and what he was asked to do. That shouldn't prevent you from wanting to bring back a player who was proven in the system, who probably comes at a cost-friendly deal on 1 year based on the injuries and stuff, or seeking out, like, I said the other day, like, my whole thing was, like, I want to see what Kyle Shanahan could do with a back like Dalvin Cook or a back like Nick Chubb. Somebody like Javonte Williams.
Just an elite guy.
Yeah. Barry Sanders was saying that he could run for 3,000 yards in this offense. And, that's probably hyperbole. But these guys,
I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. Like, these guys know what Kyle Shanahan is capable of. These guys who have been in the trenches, these NFL running backs, that they know what they're capable of. I just think that having Elijah Mitchell shouldn't prevent you from upgrading. Is he a good player? Can he be in the part of the rotation? Absolutely. Like, I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying that it's not like the 49ers have a prime LaDainian Tomlinson in their backfield, and it's like, oh, hey, we're cool off looking upgrade. We're completely content here.
Yeah, Najee Harris running around back there.
I'm not saying they should go spend a first-round pick, which they don't have. They don't have to worry about that for a couple of years. I'm not saying they should go out and, like, pay a bit, a running back, a huge amount of money. I'm just saying that if they shouldn't stop continuing to look for them, because at the same time, too, Elijah Mitchell, he was kind of ran into the ground this year. There's nothing that guarantees that he's going to be able to maintain that level of production. Like, at a certain point, I hate saying it all the time, and I apologize for anybody that this annoys. Human beings play this game. This dude's not a robot. Like, at a certain point, if he keeps getting injuries, those are going to pile up, and it's going to affect his performance down the road. You have to have some kind of contingency plan. And I just think
he runs very physical, right?
Yeah. Like, you need something more. And that's just like that's what I came away with. Because you can appreciate this, Brad. Like, that 49ers offensive line does a better job creating holes, in my opinion, in the run game than any other line in football. Between the combination of talent and scheme that they have, there was a lot left on the field. And I just think that there's, like, I'm not saying if they had Raheem Mostert, they're winning the Super Bowl and playing this weekend, but I wouldn't rule it out either. If they had Raheem Mostert this year, who knows? Maybe he runs for 150 on the Rams in the championship. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just
I don't think the 49ers lose 4 games in a row. I don't think that happens.
And that's
so
that's
that was
the thing.
A huge reason.
So if you go into next year and you have a running back room of, Mitchell, Mostert, maybe Sermon comes on and has, improves in his second year. He's healthy coming in. Juszczyk always is going to be the fourth. Maybe they carry 5. Like, that's a solid running back room for the most part. And they'll always find a guy in that undrafted free agent market that they can have on the practice squad and stash who's going to step up like JaMychal Hasty's done, like Jeff Wilson did. Like, they're always going to be able to find those guys. I just would like to see them maintain that top level of excellence that we did see from Raheem Mostert.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. I would love to see Raheem Mostert. I mean, we saw that the 49ers threw the bag at Le'Veon Bell the last time he was still a prominent player. He opted to sign with the Jets. We know how that went. It didn't work out at all. But could you imagine Le'Veon Bell and peak Le'Veon Bell with his skill set, the start and stop ability, his vision, the way he sets up his blocks, and then hits it like, man, that would have been crazy. But to your point, that's why they need Mostert, and or just the thought of having a back like that would be fantastic. Justin says, I've been looking at running backs in the draft for days, and Tyler Batty is an outside zone running back with pass catching ability that I love. Have you guys seen him at all? Have you seen Tyler Batty? I have not. Still getting into the weeds of the draft content, but have you had a chance to look at him at all?
I'll be completely honest. I just started going through the all 22. I have the college tape from this past year, like in the last week, and I admittedly I was busy with a lot of other things, focused so much more on the 49ers content and stuff I did at Niners Nation. I watched less college football this year probably than any other year I can remember in my life. Like, I just, for whatever reason, wasn't super into the season. I'm a Cal Bears fan, so it's painful enough watching them play. So I didn't really have, the drive I normally do to watch college football every Saturday. Yeah. So, like, funny enough, like, I was watching Alabama and Florida because I wanted to see more of Brian Robinson, who I think could actually be a pretty solid player. I think he could kind of be what it felt like the 49ers drafted Trey Sermon to be last year. And I'm watching, and I'm like, man, this corner from Florida is like running with Mechie and Jameson Williams and these guys. Like, I'm like, this guy, or like, this guy is like he's a good player, right? So I'm like, how have I never heard of this? How have I never seen this? So I'm like tweeting out, I'm like, man, this guy number 5 from Florida, like, he's really good. Like, he's a solid player. And I have people like, yo, this guy's been like a projected top first-round pick for like 3 years now. Like, he's like, yeah, this guy's got like a ton of buzz. I had never watched him play and like focused on it until like a week ago. So here I am sitting here and I'm like, oh man, I'm like, this guy looks really good.
I found a gem.
Yeah, and apparently he's like a first. So yeah, dude, like, I need to be better about my, my scouting and my, doing it earlier in the season. I just was so busy. So yeah, Tyler, I'm sorry, but I just thought that was super funny that I'm sitting here and I'm like, damn, this guy looks really good. And I'm not going to lie, because it was the first time I watched him play and like paid attention and started watching his reps throughout. And I'm like, damn, this guy's pretty good. If he's a projected first round pick and I'm coming away with this, maybe I still got it. Maybe I still got, the vision for it. But yeah, I thought it was hilarious, dude, that this dude like messaged me. He's like, yo, yeah, he's been like a projected first round pick for a couple years now. Like, he's up there with like Stingley and some of these other guys. And I like felt kind of dumb because I'm like I feel like I should know that, but I just haven't really been paying attention. So I apologize. Yeah. Eric knows. Eric, come on, man. I was locked into the 49ers. They were on this Team of Destiny run. Like, I literally didn't go to the Senior Bowl this year because I was so locked into staying here for the Niners. I thought they were going to keep winning. Yeah. And I was not getting on a plane and flying to Alabama the day after the 49ers lost that game. There was not a chance you would see me. I'd be on that plane listening to Marvin's Room with the window closed on the side. Like, oh, dude, it would have been.
The timing couldn't have been worse. It couldn't have been worse. It was either Super Bowl or no Super Bowl at that point. And Senior Bowl, I was just like, But it is what it is. It has been a year. I'm the same way as you, Jordan. I watched less college football this year than in a long time. And you and I, we love doing the draft. We spent all last year doing nothing but draft content in the offseason, and we're going to get there. But I also kind of enjoy the fact that we are going fresh into it. And I haven't been looking at rankings. I have not a clue And I'm actually going into it with that mindset of I'm just going to look. I have no preconceived notion. I see a jersey, I see a name. He's entering the draft. He plays this position. See what he's got. Is he this good? Is he? So I'm gonna probably tweet the same thing. Like, oh, this dude's acting good. They're like, oh, he's been all SEC for like 3 years or something. I'm like, I don't know. I didn't watch. So it'll be something to definitely. It's gonna be a different draft season this year. That's for sure.
So I'm not gonna lie, I actually might try and do that going forward because I felt the same way. I felt like I wasn't going in with any preconceived notions or like, oh, okay, well, somebody I respect said this guy's top 50. He messed up here, but they said it, so and it's so funny because I still got like all my credentials for the Senior Bowl and stuff, and they'll email you that stuff. Brad got them too. I was busy during the game, and I think you get more from the practices than the actual game itself. Honestly,
Yeah.
I think the game's cool, but you get way more from the practices. So I'm watching Penn State because I do think the Big Ten and the SEC are the first places I look for guys in the trenches, edge players, offensive linemen, stuff like that. So I'm watching Penn State, and I'm like, damn, like this edge from Penn State's like pretty good. Both of them are pretty solid. I'm like, all right, I keep watching. I'm watching. They're playing Auburn, which is an SEC defensive line or offensive line. Sorry. And I'm like, damn, this guy looks really good. So any of you guys who know Javi Vega, Fourth and Goal podcast, he's a big Penn State fan. So I text him. I'm like, Javi, what's up with your guys from Penn State? I'm like 17 and 41. Like, I don't even know these guys' names. I'm just going off jersey numbers. And he's like, oh, dude, this guy had a strip sack in the Senior Bowl today. And apparently they were like lighting it up all week in Mobile where I wasn't. And I'm like, sitting there to myself, are you kidding me, man? If I said this, now I look like a poser. I'm sitting here, like it doesn't look like I'm genuinely seeing these guys for the first time. And now it's like, oh, okay, this guy's just reading Senior Bowl highlights. And
Same thing. One of my guys, Niner Detail on Instagram, he posted like in his story Draft Crush, and it came across, and I see number 17 on Penn State. Not a freaking clue who that is. I saw maybe 3 highlights, and I was like, who's that? And that's the guy you're talking about. And now I'm seeing other people talking about him. I think Jason actually brought him up yesterday when we did our episode, and I was like, is that 17? And I was like, he's like, yep, that's 17. I don't know these guys at all. I don't know them by name. It's the same guy you talked about. Saw the strip sack. I was like, who's this guy? Lucetta, right? Is the
Lucetta Ebiketie, I think. I could be mispronouncing the second name. I apologize if so. But
yeah, and then I'm seeing other prospects on Penn State. So Penn State, if you are looking for defense, it's probably a good place to start. They got talent, and they've always produced talent. Of course, Micah Parsons came out of there last year, right?
If I may, I think everybody wants the 49ers to take a defensive back, it seems like, with that first pick that they have as of now. They might get a higher one with the Jimmy G trade or something. I think they would be much better off going edge or offensive line at 61. And I want to see them take another edge guy. And I understand, like, Ebukam's had a great year. Maybe they bring Key back. I think Willis and Amenahue have been great. But if they just keep drafting guys to keep throwing on that defensive line and go into that Chris Koceric factory of magnificent defensive linemen that he seems to produce every year, like, that's been a proven formula of success. And this class is so deep at edge where I think my thing is always you take best player available and you figure it out later. If you have a roster loaded with great edge guys, you have a deficiency elsewhere, guess what? That's a premium position. You can trade one and fill your holes later. I think that the 49ers would be much better off finding a guy in the trenches at 61. There are more safeties, DBs, and stuff. This is a great free agent class for defensive backs. And I also think that it's much easier to plug and play a really good edge rusher from day one that's going to play a significant role than it is a defensive back. I would have a really hard time counting on a guy taken in the back end of the second round to immediately come in and start in that secondary. So I just think that the 49ers, this is my whole thing. Everybody thinks they're going to go defensive back, and all these mock drafts I'm seeing, I think the 49ers are going to end up going like O-line, and it's going to be one of these picks where everybody's like, oh, in the moment, they're kind of like bummed. But down the line, they're like, okay, like this makes sense from a team building standpoint. Like you just have to keep winning in the trenches. And I hate to put it this way because injuries played a big part in it. But the 49ers lost that NFC Championship game because they lost at the line of scrimmage. And that's what the unfortunate part is that's what had gotten them so far was dominance on both sides of the ball at the line of scrimmage. And I think when you have guys like as innovative as Kyle Shanahan is, he's still old school, man. He still grew up around, that mentality that you win and lose at the line of scrimmage. Same thing with John Lynch. Like they've made it no secret. They're like, hey, we want a defensive line that's going to wreak havoc because no matter how good these quarterbacks are, how electric these offenses are, if you don't have time to get the ball out, none of that stuff matters. So yeah, I would love to see them go either address that right side of the offensive line. I don't know what's going to happen with Brunskill, but if Brunskill's gone, I think you need to find a way to get, you can probably find a guard that you would potentially be able to plug and play at that spot, or like I said, if you're an edge guy coming in and you get to work with Chris Kosaric and you know that Nick Bosa and Eric Armstead, hopefully DJ Jones and these guys are going to be on the line, you're going to get a lot of one-on-one looks. And life is going to be not easy. You still have to work very hard at the NFL level, but it's going to be much easier than a lot of your rookie counterparts who are going into situations where maybe they're the best edge rusher on a team now. You get to come in and eat with the one-on-one matchups while all of the primary resources are diverted towards Nick Bosa and his $150 million a year salary that he's probably going to get this offseason.
This is why I love talking the draft with Jordan. Like, we haven't even connected on like positional needs. This is like really our first time really diving into the draft. We're both heavy on edge, and like I want edge at second. I wanted edge last. I want edge every year. It's been a transition for me because again, same philosophies that you identified. If you can win in the trenches, it really helps everyone else. Skill positions, back end positions. You can do a lot if you can control the line of scrimmage. And we've seen the success that has come from this team, not only in 2019 that we reference all the time, but now 2021. A lot of the success that they had was because Chris Gorsuch could throw waves and waves and waves of people at you. And that was with no Javon Kinlaw. That was with no Mo Hurst. That was with no Jordan Willis for half the year. You know, they were still like able to be successful, not at full strength. So if you can continue to add pieces, and I agree, I piggyback on what you're saying earlier. I don't know if Arden Key returns. Maybe he priced himself out of returning just because he did play really, really well and showed he has a home rushing over guards out of the 3-tech, especially in pass rushing situations. So maybe he plays himself out of returning. But yes, I love it. Edge. I saw Jim Nagy tweet about it while we were actually on live. My boy D'Angelo Malone out of Western Kentucky University, edge player. When you know us, Jordan. You know, you put me on last year. You know, if you guys ever hear me talk about Azeez Ojulari, this man is the reason. I think we actually like bonded for the first time over Azeez Ojulari on the timeline. You brought me Azeez Ojulari, also Trayvon Moehrig. So this man knows how to scout.
Who
and
both started this, just throwing it out there. They're both starters year one right off the bat.
And they produced very well. And they both could have been had where the 49ers drafted in the second round. But it is what it is. We know how it works. And maybe Aaron Banks comes in and proves to be one of those impact players.
Hey man, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I don't go into drafts anymore expecting for a long time. I'm like, hey, I like these players, but there's hundreds of players in every draft.
They're never gonna draft the guys that I like.
Yeah, I was like CeeDee Lamb, love CeeDee Lamb. Yeah. I'm like, okay, Niners are getting CeeDee Lamb. Didn't happen. Then last year, I'm like, oh my god, like Trayvon Moehrig's right here. Like, they're gonna have a needed DB suit.
And Azeez, we were just like, either one. Oh my gosh, we're gonna have a chance at either one of our boys.
Twice in like 10 minutes. And then we were on live and literally we looked at each other like, who the hell is Aaron Banks, dude? Like, I'm not gonna lie. I watched a lot of offensive line tape, but I never watched anybody that big because I'm like, he doesn't fit his own blocking scheme. So they completely took me by surprise. But yeah, I just want to throw it out there. The 49ers broke my heart twice in like 7 minutes last year during the draft, and it was crushing, dude.
That's funny, dude. That's a lot of good memories, but it's getting me excited now to obviously transition into the draft. And the positional needs, again, we've talked about defense. And there's going to be a lot of moving parts. 49ers are going to address vacancies in free agency, right? It's not just going to be all draft, all free agency. They're going to pick and choose where they see, veteran here, rookie there. But what other positions of need that the 49ers could and should address in the draft, maybe thinking more long-term, again, with 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks, anything in that realm that you're kind of thinking of or starting to kind of hone your focus in for prospects in those like middle tier rounds?
Yes. Immediately the thing that comes to my mind is getting a 4th wide receiver who is fast and is good at returning punts and kicks. Somebody that can stretch the field on offense. They have a quarterback who they can dial up deep shots for now. And they need a guy. And really, if his primary job is just, hey, we need you to not drop the ball and give us positive, yardage in the return game, that's completely fine with me. Spend a 4th round pick on that because it's absolutely ridiculous how poor their return game has been for not only this past season, for like the past 10 years. It feels like since Ted Ginn left, they haven't had a viable kick returner who's going to strike fear into the hearts of opposing teams. And, I'm a bit of a, special teams enthusiast myself. I think Dante Hall, or this way, behind me, I liked him better than Devin Hester. I think having a guy like that, it's easier said than done to find it. But if you could get a guy like that flips field position, who also you can get the ball in space. Like if you gave Dante Hall or Devin Hester to Kyle Shanahan, you're telling me he couldn't scheme up looks for them on crossing routes to get them the ball in space. Find an athlete like that. Like last year, I believe the Rams drafted Tutu Atwell, right? I believe.
Yes, second round.
Yeah, Tutu Atwell was a guy who looked like that. Marquez Stevenson out of Houston who went to Buffalo. Both of those guys, Dwayne Eskridge. Like these guys like that have that speed that can contribute. They don't need to come in right away and get 75 targets, but they can be somebody that can stretch the field. And so much of what Kyle does is predicated on stretching a defense out. If you get a guy, even if they're not getting the ball, that can just take the top off a defense and open things up underneath, it would be huge. Because I think the misconception right now is that, hey, Deebo Samuel is obviously a stud, superstar, like incredible player. Brandon Ayuk, I think, is going to take a huge leap. Jawan Jennings took a big leap in year 2. People are kind of like, hey, they're set at receiver. They don't need that. They need a very specific kind of receiver. And that's where I'm kind of going with that, like, field
the
stretcher.
Wide back.
Yeah, they need somebody that can they really just need somebody that can return punts and kicks, man. It's embarrassing how bad their special teams was this past year. There's no way to sugarcoat it. I'm usually a really optimistic person. Their special teams was absolutely abysmal. And I think if they draft a guy with that mindset of, hey, let's have this guy come in and just right off the bat, not put too much on his plate, just be good at returning punts and kicks, it would be a net win with a 4th round pick.
Absolutely. And, I think both you and I were kind of looking for that wide back skill set. I think Demetric Felton is another guy that came to mind that I really liked coming out of UCLA, played running back, transitioned to wide receiver into the NFL. One of those very shifty, mobile speed guys who can play behind the line of scrimmage, can run routes, can read and run. They can do multiple different things that also translates into special teams, returning, that kind of stuff. Because Richie James used to be that role for the 49ers. He's no longer around. And to your point, they have not been able to figure it out since then. So that is going to be something to monitor, especially in the draft coming up, and would be a great target to get someone who can be a legitimate returner for this team, change field position, do all that stuff. Again, we saw the spark that Deebo provided just from his return in that divisional round against the Packers. We understand special teams is a phase that doesn't get talked about a lot, but is pretty important to the overall success of the team. Again, we saw when they weren't successful on special teams and how much.
We lost Brad. I don't know. Hopefully
Sorry about that. I accidentally swiped on the back button. So we're back, but let's answer this question. That has been up from Gammon for about 20 minutes, but I want to get to it. Deebo Samuel's new contract is coming up here pretty soon. What do you think that the average is going to look like per year for Deebo when it comes time to sign that contract?
I think it's going to be closer to 20 than 25. I do think that while he did have a great year and he did do things that we've never seen a wide receiver do in the NFL, I don't think that's going to be the model for him. Because if he was doing that for the next 5 years, I would argue if I was his agent and I was him, pay me more money, you're going to have me do all this stuff. I don't think we're going to see the 49ers utilize him like that. I think they did it out of necessity more than anything. And I think ultimately we saw the more it happened, the more teams kind of caught on. And Deebo Samuel was winning just purely based off of his raw physical ability and not because of scheme catching teams off guard anymore, which makes what he did even more impressive. I just don't think that's sustainable over the length of a new contract extension. But I do think that he's worth that kind of 18 to 19 million a year. Maybe he does get north of 20. And honestly, there isn't a number that I could really look at after the season he had where I'm looking at the 49ers. I'm like, man, you guys blew it. You just overpaid this dude. Deebo Samuels don't, you can't just find a Deebo Samuel in the draft. Yeah, and that's, you can't just find a Deebo. That's going to be the next thing that how do we find the next Deebo Samuel? You don't that. There's a reason why this player is
finding Deebo on NFL Network.
That's going to be the thing. And that's when you see these guys that are kind of hybrid players, which I think is another thing though. We spent so much time last year talking about positionless football and finding guys who can do pretty much what Kyle did with Deebo this year. So I'm not saying we were, giving Kyle any ideas, but I'm just saying that it's not like he thought of something we couldn't. Like,
we've been ahead of the curve, Jordan. Oh, now Jordan dipped. But to Jordan's point, Jordan was talking about positionless players on defense quite a bit last year. So it's funny how everything comes full circle. We're just going back and forth now at this point, seeing who can jump off the stream next. But we got the boy back. So I agree. Deebo Samuel, probably closer in the range of 20. I think PFF, just before we came on, threw out a projection, 4 years, $79 million. I think if the 49ers signed Deebo Samuel for 4 years, $79 million, no one's really batting an eye too much. They're just happy that Deebo Samuel is returning at this point. So I think that's the ultimate goal, is for 49er fans at least. Just get the guy back on the roster. I think it's crystal clear, right? Deebo Samuel has really galvanized the fan base in regards to his importance and value to, at least from a fan. We know his importance to the team and to the scheme, to Kyle, to the locker room, but overall, right? Just to the fan base in general.
Yeah, and you said 4 years, $79 million. He's on the hook for a $4.9 million cap hit next year. So realistically, they'd be getting him for 5 years, a little south of $85 million. That's a great value for Deebo Samuel. Yeah. And you put yourself in a position where, like, the 49ers do a pretty good job of front loading the guarantees to players like Samuel, which I would expect them to do, where the odds of him producing and being available are probably a little bit higher. And maybe there's a little bit of wear and tear on the back end. And it's kind of a win-win where, unfortunately, I think that the NFL should have guaranteed money. I'm not saying they should have guaranteed cap hits because that would make things very messy. But these guys should have guaranteed money for the length of their contract. Unfortunately, they don't. But I do think the next closest thing that you could have, and as a player that's beneficial, is getting those big signing bonuses, getting those big guarantees up front, so that should you face injury in an extremely physically demanding contact sport, you have that guarantee. And I think with Deebo Samuel's usage, it would be wise for them to find some kind of middle ground where they are able to front load his deal. And the 49ers do a really good job of working the cap numbers around while still giving the players those signing bonuses and guarantees and stuff. So it's not like a massive cap number, but they also get paid really quick right off the bat. The only massive cap number I can remember in the first year of a deal was that first year of Jimmy's contract. But even then, here they are towards the end of it, and they've had the flexibility to move on for the last couple of seasons. So I expect whatever they cook up, they're not alone. There's plenty of other front offices that can do it too, but the 49ers do have a pretty good track record of finding a middle ground that's going to make the player want to sign and be comfortable while also not backing themselves into a corner where it's like, oh no, Deebo Samuel's hurt and we have 3 years worth of dead money to eat. They're pretty good at finding
minus the D Ford contract. They've been doing okay, from a team viewpoint.
The D Ford thing is just it's so polarizing because they kind of they knew. It's not like they were caught off guard by that. They knew what they were getting. They knew that there was a chance of it happening. And they took a risk and it didn't work out. And then on top of it, they moved money around at the beginning of last season because I'm pretty sure they would have had to clean out now on his deal if they didn't move.
They had to push. They had to push it. They had to push it. And as a result, now we looked at least according to Spotrac, if you were to just straight up release D Ford, you're only saving about $2 million, but you're incurring about, I think, a $9 million dead cap, $9 or $10 million in dead cap. So it's a big gap of cutting him, which actually, to me, kind of shows they might give him one more shot at coming back this year. I think that's in the cards. What would you say?
Third time's the charm. I'm full of optimism, glass half full. You cannot ruin my vibe or my mood today. D Ford, baby. And he looked great. He looked great to start the season too. That's what's unfortunate. And it always pains me.
We were loving D Ford at training camp, man.
It pains me when these guys kind of, their bodies just start breaking down because it's not for lack of want. It's not for lack of effort. Yeah. It's just at a certain point, your body breaks down and it can't hold up. And it's always unfortunate to see, especially seeing how hard a player like D Ford works, because people always throw these narratives like, oh, these guys get paid and stop trying. And for somebody like D Ford, he got a bag. He didn't stop working. He's not in there, ignoring his rehab. For 2 years, dude. So it's just kind of a bummer, but it's the reality of the situation. It sucks, but unfortunately, it's again, the demands of playing a physically demanding sport.
Absolutely. Aloha, Smitty. coming to us from the Aloha State, and he's got an Aloha prospect. Let's go. Calvin Turner Jr., 6 foot, 202 pounds, running back, wide receiver, kick returner from Hawaii. Would be nice late round or free agent. Rush for, I think that's 316 yards, 4.3 a carry, 8 touchdowns. Receptions, 876 yards, 12 per reception for touchdown. Ooh, I like the stat line on that, and that fit perfectly into the conversation that we were having about the positionless player on offense that could do potentially be a rusher, be a receiver, and a returner, and be one of those fringe guys that we can move on and off the roster. I don't know anything about Calvin Turner. I don't know if you do either, Jordan, but stat line fits the conversation at least of what we were talking about, right?
Yeah, I just want to say mahalo for that one, Smitty, because I had no idea, and it will definitely help me just in my evaluations. I most of these prospects I'm watching now, like I legit don't like I have a handful of guys. Like I've been a huge Malik Willis guy for a couple of years. I don't think the 49ers are gonna, need a quarterback, obviously, so it doesn't really pertain to this, area of content. So a lot of the guys that I'm familiar with aren't really like areas of need for the 49ers. But I appreciate that because it's somebody that I can go dive into. And I think the positionless thing is so interesting because I feel like, I love making analogies across sports because I think that a lot of times we do see like professional sports leagues kind of follow trends from one another. So, baseball, for example, like who's been getting paid a ton in baseball? Maybe not these like, the groundbreaking deals are always going to go to players who are really good at one spot. It doesn't matter. But these guys who are kind of pushing those upper mid-tier level deals are guys that can play 3 or 4 positions, that you can have platoon in a certain spot. You can have, move around, switch during games and stuff. And I think the NFL is kind of catching on to that. Basketball did the same thing where there was kind of this positionless basketball where you get these guys who are wing players who can play on the wing, but they can also play small ball center, like the NFL is kind of catching on, it feels like, where you're seeing Deebo Samuels and Demetric Feltons and these guys come into the league where they can really kind of do everything. Whereas before it was just kind of like, hey, you're going to be, a scat back. That's going to be your only role. Now we're seeing teams a little bit more willing to go from, we're going to have X amount of players specialize in one area and get very good at it. And you're almost finding more value in a play. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. Davante Adams, in my opinion, is the best wide receiver in football. Davante Adams is a better route runner than Deebo Samuel, in my opinion. I think he has better hands than Deebo Samuel. He's a phenomenal receiver. If you put Deebo Samuel and Davante Adams on the same team with just average baseline quarterback that isn't Aaron Rodgers, I would argue you're going to get more value out of Deebo Samuel based on all the things that he can do, even though I think based on their positions, Davante Adams, I would say he's the better receiver. So there's more value being found in these guys that can do that. And I think that
great point.
There's something to be said for these guys. So like a Calvin Turner Jr., if I watch him, like a team might not have a high grade on him because they don't think he's going to be a stud at running back or a stud at wide receiver. But if you can offer like at least a baseline average level of play from both those positions and return kicks, why isn't that worth a 3rd round pick or a top 100 pick? Like at the end of the day, I think teams get so set on trying to hit a home run at one position that they pass on the versatility that comes with taking a guy who, again, may not have that higher end, like ceiling is the word that always gets used. But if you offer a baseline floor of decent competence at 3 different areas, like that's a huge win for the flexibility of a football team.
Absolutely. And I might have to take a look at Calvin Turner there. Aloha, Smitty. Good looking on that one because as Jordan and I have talked about, I think on both of our radars, we are looking for that exact type of player. So transitioning from last offseason, and we're on the same hype. We're just now more developed, right, Jordan? I think we knew what we were looking for last offseason, but like we know what we're looking for this offseason for sure. Corey, do you have anything you want to add on that?
I was just gonna say I love that the donation amount was $808 too. I got family in Kauai, Smitty. So
I didn't notice that.
Yeah, aloha from the mainland, my man. I always the island's got a special place in my heart too.
Good pull. I saw it. It didn't register. The 808. Let's go. Hawaii boys stand up. I seen we got one of our newest followers is a Samoan. I know we got Tongans out here. Polynesians are strong in the 49er faithful. We see you guys, man. We see you guys. Corey says thoughts on Welker going to Miami with McDaniel. Now, I haven't seen anything that's official. I've actually seen a fan page per source, drop that is what's going to be occurring. What would your thoughts be on that? Do you see that happening? Do you think it's happening? And I guess overall thoughts.
Yeah, the reality of it is that there's going to be some guys that go with McDaniel because there's going to be an opportunity for advancement. And you have to believe Kyle Shanahan, his whole thing has always been with his guys is he doesn't want his guys to take lateral moves. If they're going to make lateral moves, he's going to block their interviews and keep them in-house. But if there's a chance for Welker to get, I don't want to say he's going to be an assistant head coach, and I don't think he'll be the offensive coordinator, but like maybe there's a better role for him than wide receivers coach. Maybe he's looking for a new challenge.
Well, so when I've listened to that podcast with Schreger and McVay, right? I think it's Flying Coach, and they would bring on other NFL coaches. They had Mike Tomlin on and Raheem Morris, right? And the coaching tree, they all fit. Raheem Morris, Sean McVay, Mike Tomlin, they all fit under the Kyle Shanahan coach, not Kyle Shanahan, but Mike Shanahan coaching tree. They're all kind of the same group. And how they talked about Kyle and the role that he plays. He's the wide receiver coach. That's what they talked about. Tomlin talked about it. Raheem Morris talked about it. McVay talked about it. How that's why Raheem Morris, who was a defensive guy all his career, became the wide receiver coach in Atlanta, is because it's more of a conduit from Shanahan to the wide receivers. You're kind of in a more management style role. You're kind of doing the day-to-day, where Kyle is still taking ownership of that room, coaching those guys up. I think we've seen that, with the doghouse situation with the wide receivers a lot. I could see a situation where if Wes Welker goes to the Dolphins and becomes the wide receiver coach, he becomes like the wide receiver coach. He's not going to have Mike McDaniel, being the guy overseeing, I want it like this, I want it like that. I think it would become a more of an ownership role for Wes Welker. So I see how it could look like a vertical move on the outside, but based on what I've heard from how these guys talk about Kyle, that role and what a wide receiver coach looks like on a Kyle Shanahan team, I could actually see that being a bit of an upgrade. You're actually the wide receiver coach. You don't have your top guy overseeing you. You know what I mean? So that might be a possible outcome. But if that's the case, we tip our cap to Wes Welker. He's not a vocal presence in the organization. We know he's there, and we know he's working with the boys. But yeah, I think it would be a great opportunity for Wes to kind of take another step forward. Do you have any other thoughts on potentially Wes Welker going?
I kind of want to see somebody new in that role too, and that's no disrespect to Wes Welker. I just think that for whatever reason, that seems to be an area, whether it was Pettis and then Ayuk having his issues. Like, yeah, the players play a role in this too, but it feels they were saying for the longest time that there was issues with Deebo and his conditioning and this and that. Like, it just feels like there's more disconnect at that position group than there needs to be for the amount of talent they have. And I'm not blaming Wes Welker for that. I just would want to see if that trend continues with another person in that role. And then we can kind of sift out whether or not he was the common denominator. It's just kind of, a coincidental thing.
Yeah, we'll be able to have a little bit better insight into trying to connect the dots into what's going on with that. Because I think, I saw the stat. Don't quote me on it. I think since Kyle's been on the 49ers, they've drafted 18 wide receivers or something drafted or brought in, something like that. That's a lot of turnover. I get it. There's 6 positions typically that they hold. There could be a lot of turnover, but when you've drafted Dante Pettis, Ayuk, Deebo, Richie James, he's a 7th round pick, but Jawan Jennings, seems to be like a lot of turnover in that room. But hey, we'll see what happens with that situation. So Pete just dropped this in right away. Says DB's our weakest link. Do you think it is our weakest link? And 2, how do you think they address this? Not a lot of people are talking about Jason Verrett. I think a lot of people have removed Jason Verrett from their minds. But do you think there's an opportunity for Jason Verrett to return because again, he signed a 1-year, $5.5 million deal on the back end of playing 16 games and being one of the better players on the 49ers. So maybe there's a world signs a 1-year deal for half that or even less. Is that a range of possibility, or do you think it's go back to the well to the draft, go to free agency again, Stephon Gilmore, J.C. Jackson? What do you think they're going to do at the cornerback position, and how would you assess it? Would you assess it to be the weakest link on the team?
Um, it's hard because I think like it depends. If we're talking going into this coming season, the argument's very strong. Coming from the past season, I would have a hard time not saying that quarterback was the weakest link based on the way everybody played, to be honest. I do think that it's hard because the 49ers have built a really sound roster. Like there isn't like a huge glaring area of weakness where it's like, oh man, this is what's costing them games week in, week out. But I do think that they have a viable starter in Emmanuel Mosley, who's back on a cost-controlled deal next year after he signed that 2-year extension prior to the last season. I think he's a lock for a starting spot. He should be, at least in my opinion. I think he's a great number 2 corner. Like, is he a guy you're going to have shadowing number 1 wide receivers? Probably not, but he's a starting NFL corner, and he's on a team-friendly deal. Jimmy Ward is fantastic. This is where I think there's some disconnect because I think when we say DBs, it includes the safeties, and I think Jimmy Ward is one of the best safeties in football.
Correct.
I think Tart's really underrated, but there could be a hole there. So the fact we don't know, like, yeah, there could be a weak link based on simply on we don't know who the replacement will be. But that corner spot opposite Mosley, is very interesting because like they drafted Ambry Thomas, and Ambry Thomas is a trades guy. Hey, if he can put the whole package together, he runs a 4.3 and he has the size to play that position. And also, though, like I admittedly have some concerns where there's times where it felt like he wasn't like there was a touchdown that they gave up in that championship game where he just needed to get a little bit more depth. It felt like sitting in zone coverage, and he bit on a receiver in the flat who had a linebacker that was responsible for him. Like little minor things that may not stand out much, but ultimately are leading for opportunities. And they're learning experiences. He's a rookie. He can get better. And I think it just ties back into that kind of situation we were talking about with the running backs, where yes, you have a good young player in place. That shouldn't stop you from wanting to upgrade. And, Jamal's on top of everything. He's a really smart guy. It's really funny because I was at a game with Brad this past season. We were at the Rams game at Levi's. And I was telling him that, I think K'Waun Williams is great against the run. When they blitz him, he is so good at timing up those blitzes and hitting gaps. But I'm like, he gets torched in man coverage all the time. Nobody talks about it, it feels like. Everybody's talking as if he's one of the best slot corners in the league. And I don't see it. And I'm like, man, I just think that K'Waun Williams is a little bit overrated. And as I say that, it was that play, it got called back, but that play, if you remember, where he caught the ball, the gooch catch, literally 10 seconds before that happened. I'm like, man, this guy's kind of overrated. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. But I think ultimately
made one of the wildest catches we'd ever seen. An interception, played great coverage, got it. They didn't give it to him, but the timing was impeccable.
Yeah, and so again, like with K'Waun Williams, like he's a guy who does a couple of things really well. Like and for the value they got, he was one of their first free agent signings. It was a great pickup. He's been a great 49er. If you want to leave him in man coverage the way they have during the past season, which it feels like D'Amico Ryans is a little bit more willing to do, it's not going to work. You have to, especially when you're playing in a division with Tyler Lockett and Cooper Kupp, and these guys that they're pretty much just isolating him. We saw Devontae Adams do the same thing in the playoffs. We saw them do it week 3 against Green Bay. The guy, just for whatever reason, isn't great when he's left on an island in man coverage. And I say that with, the utmost respect for all the other stuff that he does well. I would like to see an upgrade at nickel corner. I don't think that K'Waun Williams is worth spending a large sum of money on to retain when I think there's better options out there. So, yeah, I think if we're talking weakest link, it's probably that specific position at this point in time because – it's hard because I think that he does a lot of things well. And obviously he has the experience that, Ambry Thomas or whoever would start right now opposite Mosley doesn't. But it felt like really in that game, in the championship game, in that game in Green Bay, like there were a few times where I'm just like, man, like this guy, like how are they not going to the slot and running choice routes on this guy every single snap? Like it just felt like it was compounding. And it's unfortunate because it's one thing that he doesn't do well when the rest of the package is really good. But it feels like teams have really found a way to exploit that one thing that he really doesn't do well. And I think it cost them big time towards the backstretch of the season, honestly.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think K'Waun's fantastic around the line of scrimmage, especially when you bring him on nickel blitzes and things like that. I think he's a great, gritty, just tough tackler. Like he's really good around the box, but there is something left to be desired in coverage. So I hear you, and I wouldn't imagine they retain him either. They technically didn't. He just didn't really get the offer. I don't think he was looking for. Um, so he returned. Deshaun says, look at Marquise McLean Beast. I wrote him down. I wrote him down, Deshaun. I don't know who that is. Don't even know what team he played for. But I wrote it down. It's still on, I think, Justin. I owe Justin scouting report on JoJo Dahman as well. So I'm building up my list. I'm getting the guys that I want to look at. I'm going to get there. I promise. We're still kind of like in this. I'm still transitioning out of the season, touching on all the free agent stuff. We'll get there. Do you know who Marquise McLean is by chance?
He is a wide receiver out of Southern. So, or is he at Alabama now? I had never heard of it. It looks like he's out of Alabama now, or I don't know if he's at Southern. I'm sorry. I'm trying to look into it now too because I'm always open to new suggestions. It was a transfer maybe from Auburn to Southern.
Okay. I think what the original question was, DBs is our weakest link.
6'3", 210 from Auburn, transferred to Southern. So I'll try to get that. It's kind of hard to get all 22 of them, but I'm forgetting the conference. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. But I did have Grambling, and I did have another in that conference's all 22 last year. So I'll see if I can find it.
Let's see here. Dustin the Gale says, what could we do in the draft or free agency to address and neutralize Cooper Kupp? What do you think, Jordan?
Real quick, just out of respect for them, it was Southwestern Athletic Conference. I'm sorry for blanking on it. Again, this hasn't been the greatest year for me college football-wise. But I will look into that.
We're going to pick it up here pretty soon. The next month, it's going to be lit with draft content, so don't you worry.
Dustin, that's a good question. I think the hardest part is that the 49ers, just like Brad said earlier, like this isn't a situation where they're going in with a boatload of cap space. And it's like, hey, overpay for a guy that you can just bring in for a defined role to shut down these receivers in the NFC West. They're going to have to, in my opinion, just kind of like get by on scheme because I don't know how you do stop Cooper Kupp. Like we've seen even like good cornerbacks struggle with him this year. He had one of the all-time seasons. And the problem is that the Rams run so many choice routes with Cooper Kupp. Basically, on the choice route, Kupp is dictating the action, and it's dictated based on the coverage. So it's not like a situation where you're sitting there and you're like, all right, well, he's showing this at the line of scrimmage. He's showing this off his release. This is what he's going to run. It's predicated on what you do. And I think that's what causes so many problems is that Kupp he's better than anybody I've seen because the 49ers, it's a lot of these guys under that McVay, Shanahan, LaFleur, whatever offense, do run these choice routes. Kyle tends to do it a bit out of the backfield. Play I can cite that most 49ers fans will remember was that if you remember that touchdown Jeff Wilson had against Arizona in 2019, just before the game ended, that was the game-winning touchdown. That, again, was a choice route out of the backfield where you sell. He could have gone to the flat, but he had leverage to the inside, so he cut it back in. Essentially, the Rams are doing this with Kupp a number of times a game, and it really puts DBs on an island in a tough spot because you can't sit there and like have confidently know where he's going to go. You're kind of stuck like reacting to him. And it's weird because defenses are built to react to offenses, right? Like that's kind of just how it goes. Offenses dictate, defenses react, but Cooper Kupp is reacting to you. So it's like this weird game of cat and mouse where like the norms of football are kind of thrown out the window when these route combinations are ran. So I just think the scheme and the player, it's too hard to like neutralize. But they could definitely upgrade with a corner who's a little bit better in man coverage. That maybe is better at getting their hands on him at the line of scrimmage.
A little bit better
running
press.
With him. Yeah, a little bit better press. Yeah, exactly. Because I think there is a way you can help slow him down. But, and I'm sorry for just the boring plain answer if it's like I'm, hedging. But I just don't think he's a player you can neutralize. Like some players are so good that you really can't just like effectively eliminate them unless somehow the 49ers managed like the last like DB that I really saw like eliminating receivers like that was Darrelle Revis during his peak. And I haven't seen another, as many good DBs have come in the league since then. I haven't seen anybody get close to that level. And I feel like that's what it would take. Like if you give me 2009 Darrelle Revis and put him on Cooper Kupp, like, yeah, I think he probably gets clamped down for most of the game. Unfortunately, like what are the odds of that, even entering the NFL anytime soon, let alone landing with the 49ers out of all the other 32 teams. So I'm sorry.
And one of the better coverage cornerbacks in the NFL happens to be on his team. So there's one that you get taken off the list. I honestly think it goes back to kind of a conversation that Jordan and I were having earlier in the episode. You don't necessarily stop Cooper Kupp. I think he did a really good job of explaining it again from a traits perspective. Cooper Kupp is a polished wide receiver in every aspect, mentally, physically, hands, routes, making every route just twist up defensive backs with what they think he's going to do. He gets you to bite on it, and then you sell and do something else. That's hard to stop. At a certain point, it's just like guys playing basketball, like pickup basketball. One guy's going to be better than the other. What are you going to do? I think it goes back to kind of the earlier conversation that we had. You stop Matthew Stafford. That's how you stop Cooper Kupp. You know what I mean? If you can get consistent pressure, and I think we've seen that from Matthew Stafford, if you can get him rattled a little bit, you can get him moving off his spot, keeping one eye on the defensive line, on the pass rush, and just really having to be cognizant of that, I think you can get Stafford out of his game. And if you can get Stafford out of his game, that might be the best way to neutralize Cooper Kupp, because I don't think you can do it, like you said, unless you have an elite coverage corner. But even in that instance, they bring him into the slot. They will find the matchups that they're looking for and just attack them. So maybe the best way is there's no way to neutralize Cooper Kupp. You got to neutralize the quarterback. And once you neutralize the quarterback with a pass rush, then that limits what Cooper does, right? Then those choice routes have to become, you have to change the timing of them. So maybe that's the opportunity that you go with, but I don't know. Cooper's doing pretty damn well. So
I do think, though, that it does tie in with the fact that they do need an upgrade at nickel corner, and I do think that could only help this. Again, it might not neutralize them. It may not. Yeah, that person they pick up could end up getting torched by Cooper Kupp because he's that good of a player. But at the end of the day, the 49ers have made it kind of clear that they're like, hey, we're going to pump primary resources into the defensive line. And if there is, something left after, we'll put that into the secondary. Again, I am not ready to write off Ambry Thomas. I have some concerns just with some, of like I was saying on Brad's Lives a while ago. Yeah, hey, if you have the traits, but you aren't making plays on the football, like none of the other stuff matters. But it's also unfair for me or anybody else to rush to judgment. So they clearly had a plan when they took him that he would probably be a guy who sat a year out, who would need to develop a little bit. And over the course of the season, by all accounts, he got better because we saw him in training camp. He didn't look that great. What we saw towards the end of the season compared to what we saw in training camp was a massive leap. So he can continue on that trajectory. So, nobody ever wants to hear this because they want to see results right away, and I don't blame them. But the 49ers might just be in a position where, again, in round 3, round 4, maybe that compensatory pick they got for Mike McDaniel, they spend that on another guy with traits that they put in their defensive room that they hope they can develop over time that maybe isn't contributing right away, but by year 2 or 3 is a regular starter for them. And I think, again, the 49ers just are looking for like a competent starting level player at corner rather than like a shutdown elite guy. Like they don't send their corners with number 1 receivers. They stay on respective sides of the field. And we saw like when Richard Sherman was here, teams would just move the receiver to the side Richard Sherman wasn't on and target whoever was opposite him because the Niners generally don't move their corners around. So I don't see them really budging from that.
Yeah, and we got some breaking news. It is official, like a referee with the whistle. Wes Welker is headed to Miami to be the wide receiver coach for Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins. What are your thoughts? It's official, and that's from, let me make sure I cite my source, Armando Salguero. I believe he's one of the main beat reporters or reporters that cover the Dolphins. What are your thoughts on the official?
Hey, man, good for him. Like I said, I kind of wanted to see somebody new in that position anyway, so this is a win-win. Wes Welker gets to go back to Miami where he started his career. I'm sure he's going to have a lovely time in South Beach. It's a beautiful place to live, and I think the 49ers, we can get down to the bottom of maybe if this wide receiver room could get a little bit of a shakeup. Sometimes it's not even anything that Wes Welker or whoever the coach is doing wrong. Sometimes just having a new voice in there can kind of light a fire under guys and, just hearing a different voice, different perspective. Yeah, sometimes that's all it needs. You just need a change of pace. So I'm really interested to see because it kind of could be one of the situations where we see these memes where it's like Kyle Shanahan hires Kyle Shanahan as wide receivers coach and there's like a picture of him like shaking hands with himself or something. So
Oh yes, I love that because it's true.
yeah, so we'll see. But yeah, I'm all for it, man. I'm interested to see who he fills. I think one thing I will say real quick too is that I think Kyle Shanahan, like I'm guilty of it. Like a lot of us spend so much time talking about how good he is as a play designer and his play calling and his offensive scheme that we overlook that one of the biggest or the most important qualities of being a head coach is knowing how to fill out your staff with quality assistants and building a competent
Yeah,
coaching staff. And I think Kyle's done a really good job because if you look at it, these guys, every year it feels like that he's been here, there's been a prominent hire from somebody on his staff that's taken an upgrade somewhere else, whether it's a head coaching job, going from positional coach to a coordinator, the ability to bring in a former head coach like Anthony Lynn, who had probably had a lot of interest around the league and who's highly respected, to bring in and want to come in and work with you, filling it out with D'Amico Ryans, Saleh getting the head coach. Like there's just such a long track record of him doing it that until we see who he hires and how they perform, I think it's fair to give him the benefit of the doubt that whoever he needs to replace Wes Welker with will probably end up being a good hire because the track record says so.
well, not only the track record too, but it makes it a valuable job, right? And that for the same reasons. Like Anthony Lynn probably wants to come be a part of the offensive staff because he knows if he performs well and the 49ers are successful. Mike McDaniel got a head coaching job, and he's like the furthest thing away from a prototypical, head coach. But because of the success of the Kyle Shanahan tree, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Zach Taylor, the list goes on and on now, with the impact that that tree has across the league, it becomes now a valuable position, right, to want to come to. So it's almost like Kyle's built up and set up an organization where it becomes a very uh, promising place to come be a coach where you can maybe take steps forward in your career, right?
Yeah, and I think the 49ers as a whole have done that. Like if you think back to 2017, 2016, like they were a laughing stock in those years between Harbaugh and Kyle arriving. Like nobody took them seriously. You weren't going to get a prominent hire, most likely. You were going to have to hire coaching retreads who were on their second or third job. Like nobody wanted that, Like like there weren't big free agents that were like, oh, I would love to come to Santa Clara and play for the 49ers. I would love to come. Like that just wasn't happening. And now we're seeing players not only willing to do that, but coaches willing to do that. And I think one of the best things that starting at the top with Jed York, he took a lot of culpability and onus on those years and said that they wanted to do things differently with Kyle and John. And I feel like we could debate the results on the field and all that stuff. Obviously, there's, playoffs 2 out of 5 years. That's not good enough for some people. But if we look at the overall value of what they've brought from a culture standpoint, I don't think that can really be overstated. Like, I think that there is such value in being a desirable place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's super simple, but being
a place where people, environment, right?
Yeah, it really does matter. And that's why you're able to get a guy like Arden Key. Arden Key was like, hey, you know what? Like, I can go to San Francisco, play on this great D line. I hear, like, that's the one thing you hear from a lot of these players. Richard Sherman's been pretty vocal about it. A lot of these guys who came and played for Kyle and have played in the last 5 years for the 49ers loved the vibe here. Is everybody going to love it? No, absolutely not. I'm sure there's exceptions. But for the most part, a lot of these players really like playing here. And I imagine the coaches probably feel the same way. So the 49ers do have, like, the culture reset is something. Some franchises have been dysfunctional for generations. Turning around the culture of a franchise in less than 5 years is not something to just kind of, dismiss or turn away. And I do think they've done a good job in doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, again, a lot of people earlier this year wanted to cite how many times Kyle Shanahan hadn't made the playoffs. Well, now the stat that we're going to cite is Kyle Shanahan in the last 2 of the 3 years has taken his team to the NFC Championship. So I'd say that's pretty successful based on those situations. But overall, I think we touched on the Wes Welker. Sorry, I'm just getting my posts out here, so a little bit of multitasking. I think we got enough commentary on the Wes Welker situation. Do you think clearly the 49ers need assistant offensive line coaches, and they need a new tight end coach? Now they need a new wide receiver coach. So there's going to be a lot more moving parts, and we could see more guys go with Mike McDaniel. So it's going to be something interesting to see and watch it progress moving forward. But anything else that you wanted to kind of touch on? And maybe we haven't even talked about really Anthony Lynn too much. Maybe we can end there because Jordan and I think we could literally talk, and we have done lives for 4 hours long. We could probably talk forever, but let's end it on this topic. We've talked about Mostert potentially coming back. We've talked about a little bit about Trey Sermon, Elijah Mitchell, and maybe other running backs and wide back styles. Do you think Anthony Lynn and you said you had done an extensive article on him, so maybe we'll end it on that. What are your thoughts on Anthony Lynn hiring and how he can help fill the role left by Mike McDaniel and also help continue to develop the running backs that we have young running backs on the roster. Let's not forget that.
So, Anthony Lynn came from, experience in a Mike Shanahan offense. He won 2 Super Bowls with Denver. He was with the 49ers for a couple years in the mid-90s. He is well-versed in that outside zone that Alex Gibbs and Mike Shanahan and these guys really did make so popular. He also has had some success, with more gap, power-based schemes. Like he's a bright offensive mind when it comes to developing the run game. This is my thing with Anthony Lynn. I always like to look for common denominators when it comes to success and for patterns and stuff like that, because there's the NFL is such a, it's part of the reason that makes it such a cool sport is there's so many one-off seasons. Like who would have saw the Bengals playing in the Super Bowl this weekend? It's so hard to predict, but when you see a pattern over the course of a year, 5 years, 10 years, it usually tends to have a reason behind it. So with Anthony Lynn, started his career in Jacksonville as a running backs coach. Fred Taylor had the best year of his career under Anthony Lynn, and they produced a top 10 rushing offense. He then goes to Dallas. And Dallas, he takes over. That was back when, if you guys remember, the Cowboys had Julius Jones, Marion the Barbarian, I think. Yeah, Marion Barber, if I remember correctly.
I remember Barber.
Marion the Barbarian, yeah.
Yeah.
They had a good two back set, top 10 offense top 10 rushing offense while Lynn was there. Goes to Cleveland when the Browns were just horrendous. 2007, 2008. Again, top 10 rushing offense while he's there. Then he goes to New York with Rex Ryan. The Jets have back-to-back top 5 rushing offenses under Anthony Lynn. And then he gets some years as an assistant head coach. He then goes to Buffalo with Rex Ryan. And the Bills, the first year he's a running backs coach, they're the number 1 rushing offense in the league. The second year, Greg Roman, who you guys remember, gets fired in week 2, and Anthony Lynn takes over. And the rushing offense goes from stagnant the first 2 weeks to finishing again as the number 1 rushing attack in the NFL under his guidance as the play caller. And then he goes to San Diego. This is where it gets interesting. So he went to 5 different teams and oversaw 7 different top 10 rushing offenses with multiple top overall rushing offenses and multiple top 5 rushing offenses. Mm-hmm. He goes to San Diego, I forget if it was either San Diego the last year they were there or the first year they were in LA. And he goes to LA, and the Chargers aren't really built to run the football like that. They have Phillip Rivers as a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback probably. They have weapons on offense. He caters his game plan. He wasn't calling plays, but he builds a staff. He brings in Ken Wisenhunt. You guys remember he was the coach of the Cardinals when they went on that Super Bowl run with Kurt Warner and stuff. More likely to throw the ball. So Anthony Lynn was willing and flexible enough to change his offensive strategy to really maximize what his personnel could bring. So going from having all those top 10 rushing offenses, I don't think they had a single top 10 rushing offense in San Diego, but they had a top 10 offense every single year because he was willing to build his offense around the throwing the ball. So they had the top 10 offense 3 out of the 4 years. The only year they didn't finish top 10, they finished 11th. So pretty much every single year that Anthony Lynn was the coach of that team, that offense was at or near the top of the league. And I think so many people get caught up in, that they should have been winning games. It's an indictment on him. If Robbie Gould is the kicker of the the Atlanta. I'm running on fumes. I apologize. The Los Angeles Chargers, for those 4 years, they're at least playing in the divisional round most of those seasons, probably. It really came down to them just not having a good kicker, a consistent kicker for most of those games. So my biggest thing with Anthony
was Young-Ho Koo, Squirrel, was Young-Ho Koo part of that kicker?
I think he was at first because he had some struggle before he found his groove.
And then they cut him, basically.
And then Badgley had a really rough end of his tenure there, too. Yeah. So this is my biggest takeaway with Anthony Lynn is that we know what he brings in the run game. Everywhere he's gone, literally everywhere he's gone, he's produced a top 10 offense, as contributing to the run game as a running backs coach, offensive coordinator, whatever. But to me, the ability to have the maturity to say, hey, I'm taking over, blank slate. This is my team. I get to call the shots now, and this is what I want to run. But my personnel doesn't fit it, and being willing to kind of be flexible enough to match the fit of who's on your roster, like that is like, it sounds great, right? But like most teams don't do that. Like a lot of teams are going to ship off the personnel, start from scratch, bring their guys in. That's something that I think could go a long way for Kyle Shanahan, because what I'm saying is well, Kyle Shanahan isn't, perfect. He's great at a lot of things, right? But one thing I think we can agree on is that maybe having another voice in that room couldn't hurt. Having somebody who's been there, done that, has that experience, and can kind of, on top of it, help Kyle devise these different run schemes and stuff. But what it really speaks to me is that it shows that the 49ers are extremely serious about how they want to develop Trey Lance. And I think bringing in a guy like Anthony Lynn, who has that pedigree and that experience and that respect, to be able to come in and kind of, I don't want to say watch over the team, but it allows Kyle to kind of take a more hands-on approach, I feel like, with the offense and with Trey specifically, because it's kind of like Sean McVay, if you remember, for those years in LA, like Wade Phillips. Like Sean McVay literally wouldn't even be watching the field when the defense was on the field because he trusted Wade Phillips. Yeah. The 49ers, in my opinion, haven't really had a guy like that Kyle could kind of tune out and say, hey, Trey, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to, like, you could leave Anthony Lynn there and feel like kind of like the ship's still on autopilot, if that makes sense. And I think just having somebody of that pedigree really goes a long way for Kyle. So I do think, and I can't undersell too that as good as Kyle Shanahan is, losing Michael McDaniel's huge, and there arguably isn't a better person to have replaced him to maintain that creativity in the run game than Anthony Lynn. So I'll pass it off to you. I don't want to, keep going. I appreciate anybody who listens to me and my rants, dude. I apologize for talking for 7 hours at a time, but this team there's too much to talk about all the time, man. I need to get better at consolidating my thoughts.
When GM Jordan's be spitting that fire, we just let him go. We just let him rock and roll because.
No, you got to cut me off, dude. I need like a buzzer or a timer or something, man. These people don't want to hear me talk for 10 hours. I got to get better at that, man. I'm working on it, guys. I promise.
Oh, I love my guy, man. My thing with Anthony Lynn is I think one interesting aspect of it is a lot of the coaches that we've seen under Kyle Shanahan, they've been with him since his days at the Texans, to Cleveland, to Washington. So they've been with him, but they've always been kind of, I guess, behind him because of his dad, the relationship he's had with his dad and the responsibility he was given in that regard. And Mike McDaniels is one of those guys. He used to be a QC guy, worked his way up, and rightfully deserving of the role. But I think Anthony Lynn brings almost kind of like the dad in the room dynamic. You know what I mean? Like, it's been like, hey, the boys, we built up a team and we're rocking it. Our schemes all over the league. We've taken what Mike has done and we've evolved it, and we've taken little pieces and we've made it our own. Well, now you kind of get the dad back in the room a little bit with Anthony Lynn. And to your point of kind of the same thing with Sean McVay, Wade Phillips, I think that was a great example. Could be kind of similar where, maybe some of that responsibility of being that single parent all the time, trying to wrangle all the kids. Well, now maybe your grandpa comes around and kind of helps a little bit, and you get a little bit of a break from some of those types of things. So I agree with everything you said. From a schematic standpoint, I'm really excited on the human aspect of it. And again, the way Kyle's talked about Anthony Lynn and their relationship over the past 20 years, Kyle has nothing but good things to say about that man. So I'm very excited about it. I like it. And I think a lot of the things that you said ring very true. I think it's also hilarious because I am looking at people's responses to the news of Wes Welker being gone. The initial response is a lot of WTFs, not a lot of happy people at Mike. Again, I posted this thing on Instagram 12 minutes ago. We're already headed towards 300 comments. A lot of people aren't happy about it, but kind of like what we were talking about earlier, I don't think it's a huge loss. I really don't, because Kyle is the wide receiver coach, and I don't think a lot of people, they think of him as the OC. He's also the wide receiver coach too, so I don't think we need to go crazy about Wes Welker. He's a great piece, great figurehead, comes with a lot of clout with what he did as a player, I think we'll be okay, right, Jordan?
As long as Kyle Shanahan's around, I think, and again, this isn't just about Kyle Shanahan. I think we're seeing now when you have a Kyle Shanahan, you're going to have a D'Amico Ryans, you're going to have an Anthony Lynn, you're going to have a strong coaching staff, and you're going to have a culture that people want to be around. So I think as long as Kyle, it's so funny because I have the same mentality now that I had when they were 3-5, where I'm like, yeah, I understand the results aren't there. I've seen enough from Kyle Shanahan to know that you don't just get rid of a guy like that. And
Yeah, because on the other side, who are you bringing in?
Exactly. And I just think that it's a situation where, it's on him to really hit with Trey Lance. That's going to define the tenure here. But I've just seen way too much good, and so much of that stuff doesn't get talked about. Like when people talk about playoff record and win-loss and, making the playoffs versus not, it's easy to have those conversations because there's tangible data, whereas it takes a little bit more nuance and, patience or willingness to discuss, hey, well, this guy's really good at filling out staffs. And, this was his first head coaching job. I'm sure as smart as he thinks I don't know, as smart as he thinks he is very smart. But as much as he may think he knows how to do things, there's also going to be a learning curve for him as a coach. And I think we've seen him improve as a coach over these 5 years too. And it's just when you get a bright offensive mind like that, it's so you don't want to let them get away. Yeah. And I think there's a really interesting take to be had about how these guys who are defensive minded coaches, right? Let's say they bring in a really good offense. Dan Quinn in Atlanta brings in Kyle Shanahan. They have 2 pretty good seasons. They go to the Super Bowl. They should have won. They lost on the fluky Super Bowl on one of the wildest comebacks. Everything went wrong. What happens? Kyle Shanahan ends up leaving. Dan Quinn stays there. The Falcons are still a decent team. The offense absolutely goes into a tailspin. And the problem is that those good offensive coordinators playing under the defensive-minded head coaches are almost always going to get a shot to go somewhere else to run their own show because that's the way the hiring process has gone. If you are a good offensive coordinator and you produce year in and year out, you're going to get a job. So when you get that offensive mind as your head coach, you get much more stability. And I think just as much as it would be nice to, know that D'Amico Ryans would be here for the next 10 years, it's not going to happen. He's too good at his job. He's going to have an opportunity elsewhere. I would much rather have that stability on the offensive side of the ball with the offensive genius that is Kyle Shanahan over a really smart defensive mind because you're always going to have that revolving door. And we saw firsthand Alex Smith. Alex Smith had 7 offensive coordinators in the first 7 years he was here. Is he going to be an all-pro player if he has one offensive coordinator the whole time? No, but he certainly would be more comfortable and probably would have looked a lot better if there wasn't that much turnover. So I think the other thing with Kyle that people overlook, it's not just about the person, it's about the archetype of the kind of coach he is. And when you get that kind of elite level offensive mind, you don't let them go because that continuity you get and that stability you get from your offensive scheme is invaluable. And we saw as much as, Robert Saleh was really good, they got better on defense with D'Amico Ryans. I think it's easier to make up that that scheme gap on defense than it is to go to a completely new offense year after year after year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I think, to your point, defense is more reactive. Kind of even back to the conversation that we had about Cooper Kupp. You're more reacting to what the offense is trying to do to you. Your shell schemes and coverages, they're the baseline the same pretty much anywhere you go. But there's, of course, little wrinkles based on personnel, language changes. But overall, defense is kind of defense, right? But we understand zone scheme versus power scheme. Huge difference in personnel, huge difference in how you attack certain things. So I think I hear you 100%. I think you're spot on per usual, my boy. We are at over 2 hours, and that was one of the quickest 2 hours I've had in quite some time. So thank you, Jordan. But let's end it on these 2 super chats that we got here that I've been waiting in the wings. Justin E says, didn't give you guys batty stats earlier. Basically 2,700 rushing yards, 1,100 receiving yards, 34 touchdowns, 4 200-yard games in 2021. No fumbles, no injury history. That's a pretty impressive stat line, wouldn't you say? And he was a running back, from my understanding, right?
Yeah, from Missouri. So he's playing in the SEC. Again, I'm not one of these SEC or bust, but I do think there is something to be said for the level of competition there. It is a little bit easier to project when these guys are going up against top end talent like that, especially a physical position like running back. So yeah, I'll definitely take a look. I appreciate the heads up.
Yeah, we'll take a look at Batty. I like the name recognition right off the bat. A win. Jamal Appreciate the $10 super chat. Appreciate all the super chats, guys. I haven't really. I'm trying to pay attention to the chat, but me and Jordan vibing for 2 hours straight. We keep going. But Jamal says, "Are y'all aware of Dax Hill, safety out of Michigan, with great athleticism, versatility to play both safety spots and nickel? Legit 4.3 speed, 4.4 speed, really good run fitting DB. I get Jimmy Ward vibes hard with him. And I saw some reports. I have no idea how true they are, but the 49ers could be going after Jabril Peppers, former Michigan guy, and safety, who kind of sounds similar, right? One of the big things with Jabril Peppers was his versatility and athleticism. I don't know personally Dax Hill, but maybe you have, Jordan.
I feel so stupid every time somebody asks me about these prospects because I haven't watched like any of them. And like anybody who watched last year, like I pride myself on the amount of research and tape I watch for draft stuff and prepping. I just haven't had time to do it yet because I'm like, okay, well, we have 2.5 months till the draft. I'll have plenty of time to get around to it. But yeah, it's pretty upsetting to me because I feel like there's a certain level of excellence that we try to maintain. And people are like, oh, we heard this player. And I'm just like, I'm not going to lie and be like, oh, yeah, dude, for sure. Like, I'm not going to lie. But I'm also like, well, no. Like, damn, no, I don't. So I'm appreciative of it. But it also sucks, too, because like I said, I'm sitting here and I'm watching some of these guys. Just the first time I'm seeing it, I'm like, oh, this guy looks pretty good. Based just on my, I'm not a scout. I've been floated around the same, sentence as Todd McShay a few times. Just throwing that out there.
We call him GM Jordan for a reason.
But it pains me because I'm like, oh, this player looks really – like I said the other night, I'm not going to lie. I was sitting here in my office like super late watching, this Florida tape. And I'm like, damn, this guy looks really good. And I'm like focusing in and I'm going back and watching all these reps. I'm like, damn, he looks so good. And here I am coming to thinking, I'm like, hey, like this guy looks really good. I don't know if the 49ers can get him. He looks like he's going to be pretty high up draft boards. Like he's pretty good. And everybody's like, yeah, dude, like we've been new. Like, come on. Like, what are you talking about? And I'm just like, oh my God, man, this is like so embarrassing that I like.
Yeah, no, I'm over here talking about prospects that I found last year that I knew that were going to be prospects this year. Like, hey.
One that I do want to throw out there, and I've talked to you about it before, was last year when Brad and I watched like dozens of hours of Trey Lance, and I kept going, I'm like, damn, this number 1 for North Dakota State, like he's good, man. Like, who is this guy? And I have a tweet. It's in the record. There is a bookmark I can fall back on last year where I'm like, hey, man, like this Christian Watson guy is a name to watch. And I'm seeing all these 49ers fans fall in love with Christian Watson now. So I just want to throw that out there. For as much as I am lacking this year, last year, I was on it, dude.
First, so Christian Watson.
Hey, 50% is an elite field goal percentage if we're talking hoops, man. So I'm just going to apply that same mindset to this.
Oh, my goodness. Hey, right, if you're like batting 200, 300 in baseball, you're doing all right? You're making.
If I'm batting 500 in baseball, I'm the greatest of all time. So let's just, I'm not a narcissist or anything, but I'm just saying. I'm just saying, like, in an alternate world, this 1 out of 2 years is a phenomenal performance on my part. Just saying.
Absolutely, but I can guarantee you one thing: the amount of draft prep that Jordan and I will do from this point until the draft will be up there with a lot of people. It might not be there now. Like, admittedly, we are both ground floor. Like, we are both just like, all right, because we both cover the 49ers, and the 49ers made a deep run. And when you make a deep run, and again, Jordan, you and I both felt the same. I know you didn't want to say it. I felt it, though, the same as well. Team of Destiny is like, oh God damn it. But it felt like they were going to the Super Bowl, and I guarantee you and I were dead set to have the best 2 weeks of Super Bowl coverage that we could absolutely put together. So when it switched and it was like, oh, Senior Bowl's this week, we're like, I'm just not.
I could not get excited for it at all. I was watching the cut-ups of practice and everything, and I was just sitting there like, damn, dude, like this really
First
happens.
day, I didn't even look. Tuesday, like I glanced, and I was like, I was still like, I'm still hurting from this L that like the 49ers just took. Because again, like I was prepared for the Super Bowl, but it is what it is. As you can see, Jordan and I are very passionate about the subject, as we have been on for over 2 hours and probably could do another 2 hours, but
we did six during the second round of last year's draft. We did 6 hours, dude.
That was crazy. Absolutely insane. But I guarantee you, Jordan and I, the amount of hours that we are going to put into scouting prospects it's going to be up there with a lot of these guys who do it for a living. So we'll get there, and we do appreciate actually the suggestions, because now allows us to kind of intertwine, the sourdough squad, intertwine the viewers into our prospects. So one of the cool things is now we can come back in future shows, say, hey, we looked at Dax Hill, here's our scouting report, and this is what we think based on Jamal's suggestion and things like that. So I've already been doing it with Justin's already thrown me 2 or 3 prospects that I've looked at per his suggestion. So we're all for it. Keep sending us the prospects and we'll keep doing it. Tell the good people, Jordan, where to find more of your content, where to follow you, where to read your work.
You can find me at NinersNation.com. I'm doing work for them pretty much every day. I try to put out at least a few posts a week. Right now, I'm working on one that'll go out tomorrow. If you are interested in the 49ers, like off-season, what's going to happen, who's a free agent, what's the difference between the restricted free agents, exclusive right free agents, how many draft picks they have. The piece I'm working on tonight that's going out tomorrow is basically just like a reference point you can go back to between now and then to kind of really get you prepared for what's coming, who may be leaving, who might be staying. So I'm working on that right now. You can find me at Twitter. My handle should be on the screen there. I do a lot of my work through there. The other thing I would add too is with all the draft stuff Brad and I are going to do, like there's a lot of people who I have tremendous respect for, who help me out with prospects, who help me get all 22 and do stuff like that. They are focused on doing draft coverage for 32 teams. But Brad and I are watching prospects. It's 99% of the time pretty much just like, hey, is this guy going to fit for the 49ers or not? And if they don't, usually we're kind of like, all right, on to the next. There's so many guys to get through. So if you are looking for something that's specifically just more tailored towards the 49ers and what their needs are, I do think that's something we pride ourselves on because, again, so many of these guys who do this for a living, they don't have the luxury of only talking about fits for the 49ers. They have to do that 32 times over. So I love this time of year. Like I said, last year we cranked out so much content doing draft stuff. So I'm really excited to do it again. And I will start to do some of my work at Niners Nation towards some of these. I'm admittedly going to focus on free agency for the most part now because they do have a lot of work to do with players already at that level. But we got a long way till the draft. I don't want to speak for Brad. I will be in Vegas for the draft. I'm hoping he comes along too. I have it on good authority that Mr. Jason Aponte will be there as well. So maybe there'll be some live stuff from the draft. Just throwing it out there. And if any of you guys are in Vegas, I'm always I'll never turn down a drink in a blackjack game if you guys want to link up down there. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be a fun draft this year, man. It's in Vegas, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And if you and Aponte are down there, I'm probably going to have to show up and tag along on those coattails. So I might be in Vegas too if that's the vibe this year.
Hey, we're talking coattails. I hope he has enough room for both of us because it sure as hell isn't my coattails. It's going to be Jason's coattails.
Shout out Sideline Aponte. That man is a legend. He is famous now. It's official. Again, like a referee with a whistle. That man, built different. Swag to the roof.
Okay, real quick, Antonio, that's the cornerback that I was talking about from Florida. It's Kaiir Elam. That's who I watched. I had never seen him play before, and I'm like, damn, this guy looks really good. He's a great corner. I love him. Apparently, he's a first-round pick, and that's like a consensus where it was like, dude, you're a year and a half late. Like, welcome to the, like.
I saw some like PFF thing where he has like the craziest, like the lowest completion percentage in the SEC in like 10 years, like. Crazy,
he's perfect for this scheme because he has the size to match up in man coverage, but he also looks really good in zone. There's a few things he can work on, but he looked dude. If somehow, like, I'm like just thinking if for you guys who know what I'm talking about, that like gif of like John Lynch where it like pans across his face and he's like smiling after the Vikings game. Like, I'm like, if he finds a way to trade up back into the back end of this first round and get like a legitimate like potential number one corner, oh my, like I just like he's done a phenomenal job as is. I'm gonna spam that gif every single day on Twitter. I will literally wake up for a month to post that gif with no context every day.
I can't wait, man. I'm getting really excited for this off-season content. I agree. It's been a process for both you and I, Jordan, again, as two people who keep the pulse of the 49ers. So we are going to be making our way. It's our passion project. I'm passionate about the draft. I'm passionate about the team, but my first love is the NFL draft. I love scouting. I can't wait to get into it. And this is also kind of helping me get the juices flowing. They're already headed there, but now it's like, all right, I'm ready to get to work now and get some of these boys tape done and figure out who could be a fit. And a great point. We're going to be all over the needs for the 49ers. I guarantee you. How many episodes were we doing? It was kind of a progression thing. I think the closer it got to the draft, we started doing more and more and more
Dude,
and
we
more.
did like 3 a week. We were doing like 12 hours a week of draft stuff. Like it was insane, dude.
And it was all fresh content, and we weren't doubling up. We weren't talking about old crap. There's so many prospects. There's so many things to look at. There's so many moving parts, especially with this team. Obviously, the big point of emphasis was the quarterback last year. What's going to be so exciting about this year is now we get to look at hopefully, but we're going to be looking at all the other prospects and deeper prospects. So now, Jordan, we're really going to be able to shine here, really start to find those gems again. We're still kind of seeing these upper echelon guys that we still have to scout, and we're going to be like, oh yeah, those guys are good, but it's those third, fourth rounders where it's going to be a lot of fun to break them down and bring them to the 49er faithful and see if we like them, see if we don't. Again, we're not going to hit 100%, but it's going to be a lot of fun, man. Thanks for joining me, as always, in your time. Again, Jordan, we could keep going probably for another hour or so.
Dude,
I appreciate you, man.
I have so much respect for anybody who can like stand to sit here and listen to me go on like 3-4 minute long rants. Like I don't know how I don't know how I listen to myself talk, let alone other people. So I appreciate all of you who care enough to hear what I have to say to put up with that. But I apologize for anybody who's like, dude, this guy needs to shut up.
Hey, I talk about it all the time, man. I do long lives, so if you have made it from start to finish, you deserve a cookie, you deserve a medal, you deserve an award for sitting through all of this. We thank you, Sourdough Squad. You guys know you guys are a vibe. We appreciate you. And I think someone said earlier, gotta have Jordan back on. Oh, get used to see Jordan over here. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait. The offseason is just really getting started, so I'm very, very excited, man. Cookie. Let's go. We see you guys. I appreciate you as always. Give us a like on the way out, smash that sub button, and we're gonna have more content for you guys tomorrow. But thank you as always, and we are out of here. Grab your cookies on the way out. We appreciate you guys.